Welcome to the Freeborn Podcast. I'm here with a very good friend, an old friend from a long time, Bill Kincaid. He's one of the elders at Gatherings in Jesus' Name at 602 Oak Knoll here in San Antonio, Texas. And he's been a missionary he was a missionary for over 30 years, I believe it was, both in Guatemala and in Mexico. We worked together in Toluca, Mexico for a number of years. You can find content that he creates on the YouTube channel called Unapologetics. He has a number of videos there, short, like gospel-oriented videos, and you can check out his content there. Also, the Gatherings in Jesus' Name has a church website at gatheringsinjesusname.org where you can find his sermons, and both video and audio. And they also have a YouTube channel for Gatherings in Jesus' Name. And he's one of the most faithful and extraordinary street preachers I've ever known. And so I'm very happy to have him here. Thank you, Bill, for coming in and talking with us. I'm looking forward to an interesting conversation. We were just talking about YouTube, and I was telling you that how they'll... In fact, I'll tell you all right now, if you lose the stream, it's because we got nuked, and it might happen. And so we're recording the audio and the video of this, right, Nolan? We got it recording? We always forget.
The audio is recording, the video's not. Give me a second.
Okay.
He always forgets.
Yeah, all right.
All right. So we're recording the video and the audio, and we'll put it up. We'll put it up if YouTube kills the stream. Nolan's not even going to tell us if that happens. We're just going to keep going, and we'll put up the audio if that happens. Anyways, I was telling you that what it is YouTube does not allow you to talk about any type of current dilemma or current problem. So if there's like a shooting, you can't talk about it. If you mention it, they'll kill your stream. The pandemic, when it first happened, that was like current. No, it doesn't. It's real interesting.
And it's not even leaned. It's not like leaned one way. It's not biased. No, it's just...
It doesn't seem to be. It doesn't seem to be. It seems to be the rule.
They're just afraid of people's opinions, or
from what I've heard is they don't want people like intruding into like catastrophes on the moment. Like, I don't know if they're afraid of yellow like journalism type stuff. They don't want sensationalism. I don't know what it is. It's weird. When the coronavirus thing first started, and we'll see if this gets us kicked off.
You said the word.
I know.
You should not have done that.
I should not have done that. When it first started, or within, I would say in March maybe it was. So it's been going for a while. And I was doing a podcast in Spanish, and I mentioned the word coronavirus, and they killed the stream. And I thought, well, that's probably my internet. So we put it up, and they killed the stream. And then I quit using the word, and that was it.
So you're on their radar, maybe, and they're monitoring you.
It's everything that goes on is monitored. It's all through algorithms. There's not people listening.
Yeah, well,
it all runs through their huge server farm algorithms, and if they have things flagged, and if you say something that's flagged, they just kill the stream and bounce the video. So you don't know.
Well, the world is going that way. Technologically, the world is going that way. It's like we're going downhill and increasing our speed, and the hill is getting steeper because every single year it's just becomes more and more technologically advanced, and we have no idea where it's going to end, where it's going to land, except the Bible tells us it's not going to end good. Not going to end well.
Yes. It's going to not end good. That's true.
If you don't take the mark, you just die, They behead you or something. I don't know. I'll have to ask Brett. I'm not sure what Brett thinks about that.
Yeah, Brett would be the one to ask,
yes.
Yeah. Have you heard the ones that are saying that this whole Corona thing is a conspiracy to get people to wear masks so that they'll be willing to take the mark of the beast more easily?
I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, that's what they're saying. There's people that we know personally, you and I both mutually know personally that's their view. That this is all like a new world order government conspiracy.
When you have some company like YouTube censoring things like that, well, conspiracy theories don't seem that outlandish because that is a conspiracy. That's not right. It's like 1984.
Yes.
And I'm not talking about the year. I'm talking about the book.
No, yes. Yes.
So.
Yeah, it's getting harder and harder to argue against the conspiracy theorists and tell them that they're crazy.
Yeah, just because I'm paranoid doesn't mean they're not after me.
That's right. It's getting much, much harder to tell them, oh, you're overreacting. Yeah. It's getting more difficult. So how is this affecting gatherings in Jesus' name, this whole Corona thing? How
Oh
are you
man,
guys
it
handling
has
this?
it's really blessed us in some ways. I mean, we had a little struggle for a while because we first tried to do their recommendation, have meetings of less than 20 people. That's what they had said. They said 25, and we said, well, let's just keep our meetings down to 20. So we separated out into, and we are kind of like for that. We like the idea of the church being cellular and being able to function wherever. And so we did that for 1 week, and then they changed the rules on us and said no meetings of more than 10 people. And so we just said, well, we'll just do it online. So we started doing it online. Then when they gave a new sort of recommendation where they said you can go back to having meetings but keep social distancing, whatever, we tried that. But the problem is a lot of people were still afraid and didn't want to come. And so it was pretty weak. We had online, a lot of people online, but it wasn't the same. So since then, starting in May, we started having drive-in meetings. So now
In the parking lot.
just about everybody shows up. We actually, did the heretical thing. We built a stage on top of the baptistry. And
Did you put a trap door in it?
we need to do that. Yes, I didn't think about that, but that's a good idea. No, but we built a stage and have a canopy there because it's probably going to rain tomorrow.
So you have a pavilion now.
No, we're like the Pope. The Pope showed up here. He had those towers in the back, but we got our church building in the back with the stage. I mean, I don't like it because it gives the wrong impression about what a church is. But at the same time, they need to be able to see over the cars that are in front of them. So yeah, we have them standing up. And the truth is, just about everybody comes. We got everybody showing up, and we have good fellowship. People can see each other and talk. We don't get close or anything, but we've had more visitors. We've had visitors come by and and drive in and stop and listen. Now we have contacts with them, and we're expecting even more. We've about decided that even after this whole thing is over, we might want to do that, once a month or something of that nature, just as an outreach, because
Do an outdoor meeting.
It's an outdoor meeting, a drive-in meeting.
Do you think people are more confident to visit because they're in their car?
Absolutely, that makes a huge difference.
Because if it was like chairs out there, you wouldn't have people coming.
I invite people that I work with, to my church all the time, and they almost don't want to come because we're a little too out there, too zealous or something. I'm not sure what it is. And I'm not willing to compromise just to get people to come. So, whatever. But I've had them say, oh, you're doing it that way. I might show up, and that just is an indication to me that they're uncomfortable walking into a building and, being exposed as in that building with all these people. And I'm not talking about for the virus. I'm saying
yes, no, I know
they're
what you
exposed. But in their cars, they're completely free.
They're in the getaway vehicle with the engine running.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we open up all the exits. We usually keep some of the exits closed because we have, vandalism in the cars, what have you. And that's pretty much stopped it. But now when we have this, we open up all the exits. And so people can drive in any direction and park. And
So how do you think this is going to affect church going forward? I mean, how long do you think this might last? What are you guys looking at?
I think it's...
Because now they're talking about...
I think it's permanent. I think from now on, we're going to have... Even the Bible says pestilences, and it's going to happen. This is our world. Like I said, we're on a steep decline, and it's getting faster. We're accumulating speed, and the hill is getting steeper because the world's population is so large, and there's so many issues at hand. And I'm discounting all the nuts ones. That the ocean is rising and stuff. I'm talking about real things like communist China and their serious problems and globalization and there's no way to stop new viruses. There's no way to stop new. I don't know if you ever read the book 1491.
No.
Fantastic book. He's got a sequel that's 1493. And it's all about Columbus. It's about what was before Columbus. And they've got actual evidence of what existed before Columbus and what existed after Columbus. And just that it'll blow you away.
Are you talking about the way the Europeans introduced so many diseases into the New World?
Both directions.
And then syphilis back the other way.
Both directions.
Yeah.
And the fact that the Americas were extremely populated. Hundreds of millions of inhabitants. Maybe not quite as populated as Europe, but it was very populated. They have eyewitness accounts of these explorers in their ships, and they would mention these cities on the east coast of the Americas, or they went up the Mississippi back in the 1500s, and there were cities on both sides of the Mississippi as far as they could travel up in their boats, and that when they went back 50 years later, there was nothing, and it was almost not populated at all, and it was a huge die-off. It was like, now that happened back then, and it's happened since then, little at a time. And they've discovered things like penicillin and what have you, and that has decreased that problem for the last 100 years. But now what we're hitting is viruses, and it immediately goes all over the world. And how are we going to stop this? This is going to happen every time. We have to learn how to cope with these kind of pestilences without solutions, without penicillin, we just have to cope with it somehow.
Bring that right up close to you, so you're not.
Sorry.
You can move it right over to you. Yeah, you just start sounding real far away when you're.
Yeah. This is ridiculous. Just to let you know, I got this thing in my face.
It takes some getting used to.
No, but I just see everything changing, and I say that from a standpoint of experience, because 20 years ago, did you ever read the book The Cuckoo's Egg?
No.
It's a book about a guy that was an astronomer, and he got laid off, and they hired him on as a programmer, and so they didn't have a lot of work for him, and so he was in Berkeley, and so this was back in like 1980, maybe 1985. I'm not sure exactly the year, but they gave him a problem to solve on an accounting error or whatever. It was a 75-cent, discrepancy, and he starts looking into it. And they didn't give him the right kind of equipment, so he had instead of a monitor on his. This was before the internet. It was the government intranet, sort of with certain businesses, all of them connected. Before the internet's like the beginning of the internet type thinking, and He didn't have a monitor, so he wasn't registered as the computer thing did not register him as being on this server or whatever, and so he started noticing some stuff. All he had was a printer. He would put a printout of what was happening.
Right.
And so he's printing out all this stuff that's happening, and he starts noticing these people getting on, and they're getting on at certain times, and they can't tell that he's on, because he's not hooked them to a monitor or something. I'm not sure exactly how it works,
right.
But it's a fascinating story about how he tracked these West German spies that were spying for Russia.
What's the name of the book again?
I think it's The Cuckoo's Egg. I forget the name
I'll
of
have
the.
to look into that.
Oh, it's a fascinating. I couldn't stop. I couldn't put it down. But it's
So he tracks these German spies.
and because he did it all by paper, rather they couldn't tell that he was on, and then he has evidence to show in court because he's got stacks and stacks of these paper printouts of him following them around and then researching where they're getting on and how they're getting on and how it all works. It's a fascinating book. But the idea is 20 years ago, well, there was no internet, or 25 years ago. I remember doing research back when you had to go to the bookstores and buy books, cheap on some subject or whatever, and that's how you did your research.
Yeah.
And now it's a whole different.
No, it's a whole
It's a
different
whole
world.
different ballgame. And this is 20 years. 20 years this has happened.
Yes.
Which is a whole new world.
Yes.
It's hard to even remember what it used to be like for us.
No, it is hard to remember. So it's hard to even think what you would do to find some place, how you drive somewhere without your phone anymore. It's like, when's the last time you ask anyone, hey, how do I get somewhere?
Forget it.
First of all, they don't know either. Even if it's,
what exit is it on? Which is the best way to get there? Yeah.
they look at you like, don't you have a phone? You just type it in, and it tells you where to go.
It's like the people who ask what time is it.
Yeah.
Just get a watch, man. I'm not going to sit around telling you what time it is because you're too cheap to have
And
a
so,
watch.
what do you think? So, if this goes on, I mean, what is church going to look like? Because see, we're looking at it. It worked out really. The virus didn't work out well for us, but everything leading up to it worked out well for the virus. I don't know if you understand what I'm saying.
No,
So,
I don't.
So we were renting a place,
I remember that.
and so it was like a lot of money every month to rent it and the utilities and everything. It was quite a bit of money, and the guy wanted to raise the rent, and so we said, no, we're not paying more for this place, and we just left. I was tired of paying rent and decided if we're going to put that much money in, I'd rather build a place or something. So we left, and that was right before this. So if we renewed our contract for 2 years,
You'd been hurting.
Oh,
yeah.
we'd be in bad trouble right now because we'd be paying.
So the
rent on
Lord just
something.
took care of you. That's
He
what it
took
is,
care of
yeah.
us in an amazing way.
Yeah.
Amazing way. And then that YMCA was a week to week thing. Very little money. We were paying like
So, but what do you do?
Like
You're just doing
$100 a
online
week?
and you're expecting to stay online?
We
Because
don't
that's
know.
really not church.
we don't know.
It's like
I know.
there's something there that I'm guessing it's all heading towards something sort of like the church in China, or the church in North Korea, which is
see, right now,
it's a
though, we
very
can't even-
cellular kind of church.
Right now, we can't even really do home church because you can't have that many people in a house if you want to be legal. What do you think about that? What do you think about when the government says you guys can't have meetings?
Well, legally, I don't think it's right. I don't think they can say that. I don't think the government
mean
has
constitutionally?
constitutionally,
Okay.
and even rationally, just from our standpoint of freedom, the government should not have any right to quarantine me, to tell me that if I want to put myself at risk, they say I can't. I don't think they have a right. Now they have a right probably to protect vulnerable people. They probably have a right to say you can't have visitors in the hospital at certain whatever. I'm not sure how, because there's other things involved. But for me, tell me that I have to wear a mask for my own protection. No, I don't think they have the right. Now, if they're saying I have to wear a mask for your protection, they might have some right.
Well, but isn't that what they're saying? Isn't this whole thing is about?
No, it's collective protection is what they're worried about.
They're protecting everybody,
They're-
not just
they're
you. They're not saying
protecting
we're trying to
society.
protect you. We're trying to protect everybody.
That's right.
Is
They're
that right?
protecting the collective. They're protecting society, and collective thinking is dangerous. That's bad stuff. It's. I mean, I can't believe that we went through the 20th century and people still don't realize how dangerous their collective thinking is. This is.
Well, that's because most of the young people don't even know about the 20th century.
Yeah, that's true.
That's a big problem. They don't even know. They don't even know. They think.
Well, even my generation, we didn't live really through it. I mean, we saw the failure of communism, but people don't even realize what caused it to fail. They're not even sure.
Yeah.
There's a lot of ignorance around. So much knowledge and so much ignorance at the same time.
I mean, it looks to me like you have a problem, and speaking pragmatically, we have a problem today, but the foundations go a long ways back. And I think it seems to me that because we have such socialized medicine, even in the U.S., where the government is picking up so much of the bill for people that go into emergency rooms and hospitals, then they're saying, we're paying the bill on your medical, so you get sick because no one wants to wear masks, then everyone's sick, you all run to the hospital, and then you want the government to bail out the hospital.
Well, that's collectivist thinking. It's the idea of having the government involved in any medicine at all, whether it's Medicare or whatever. And I realize there are reasons, because old people don't have the money to go to the hospital and get themselves taken care of, so they say, well, we have some obligation. It's a bear of a problem, but
it's a huge problem.
But the collectivist problem
Is also a big problem.
It's a big problem.
Yeah, but then let's say that this because they're right now, the reports I'm reading, they're predicting a second wave that's going to be worse than the first. Is what most of the doctors are predicting right now, or I say most, many of them are, and they're saying that this second wave that's going to happen after the summer is going to be worse than the first. If that happens and they shut everything down long term, and it looks like this could just keep going, where they're saying there's not going to be church services anymore, then what do you think churches ought to do?
Well, I think the church, I've thought for a long time, church has been misunderstood. We have buildings. We go to these buildings and we function all around a building. We've always misunderstood it. We in Mexico had a real revelation as to what a church is, because we were meeting in parks and we never focused on a building. And I personally think that was a real liberating concept. It actually explains some things. But and so I have a little different mindset on it. I'm not afraid of cellular churches. I'm not afraid of turning it into a cellular church. The problem is where they say you cannot gather, and the Bible clearly says to gather. And there's no what do you call it? There's no qualification. It's clearly, don't forsake the assembling of yourselves together. It's an idea. Jesus says, where two or three are gathered together in my name. And it's called the church, ecclesia. It's the gathering. It's the calling out of people to come out and get together. And that's what they did in the old synagogue days, and on the Sabbath, and they would get out and gather. And I mean, good grief, it's gathering. And how can you have a church that's not gathering? And
But
I don't
then
know.
what do you do when the government says if you have more than 6 people or more than a single family in a house?
Well,
or
as
a
long
day?
as the government is making rules that we can follow, I think we ought to try to follow them. But there's going to come a time where the government's going to make rules that we can't follow, and God's rules they're superior to our rules, to our government's rules. And so I would say we are justified in disobedience if the government says we can't have church. And even these churches in the East Coast that are saying we're going to have church anyway, even though you've outlawed it, I think they have good standing. I don't think that they are wrong biblically.
Now let's assume that these are all hypotheticals. I'm not, I understand that, but let's assume hypothetically that this virus is more than what I think it is, or maybe other people do, and let's say that it starts wiping out millions of people.
I think this virus is as dangerous as they say, and I did the research. It took me a while because news organizations do not give you any real information.
No, they don't.
But if you go to the sites where you actually have records of deaths and what have you, and don't pay attention to the political aspects of what's called a death and what's by the virus or what's not. Forget all that. Just do the actual statistical comparisons of what's happened since this virus has come on the scene. And I mean, a lot of people are dying. New York City had an average stable for decades, at least 2 decades, stable of about 140 to 150 deaths per day. It would spike up during certain flu seasons or whatever, but it would spike down in other times. But it was averaged out over decades of right in that range, 140 to 150 deaths a day. And during these last couple of months, it got up to 900 deaths per day. And so no matter what you call it, something's happening, and 900 people dying a day, that is really significant.
Okay, so let's assume that carries on. So then does a church have a responsibility to figure out a way to gather that isn't exposing everyone to that type of a danger then? Because let's put aside the idea of the government saying you can't do it. But you as a pastor, if you're looking and you're saying this could kill everybody in this church, and is it irresponsible then to say, well, we're going to get together and gather anyways in any amount of sizes?
It might be.
Then what do we do in that case? Where we take the government completely out of it. It's not about what they're saying. It's about us saying, hey, people are, this could wipe out our whole church.
Well, that was one of our considerations. When we started, we weren't sure at all whether this was real. I had real doubts about the, what do you call it? The reality of this virus thing. I didn't know. It didn't seem like anything more than a flu, but I was wrong. It's clearly more than a flu, and it's much more dangerous, and it's lethal. It's very lethal. And even though most of the people who are dying are old, and a lot of them could have been prevented because of the old folks home situation that some people messed up in their decision making about preserving hospital rooms, and they put them in old folks' homes, and that's the most vulnerable population. People, I mean, they're talking about half the deaths. Half the deaths in the U.S. are attributable to that, and that's significant. So, but this is a lethal thing, and so we had already considered our responsibility to protect our old people in our church, and so we were ready to do even before.
How could we do church? Just speaking hypothetically, it's because I mean you point out that there is an imperative of actual gathering of congregating, and yet what if it's lethal to do so? What if it will kill you to do that? Then what do we do?
Well, if it gets to that point where it's lethal to go to church, I would say that the lethality is within all of society. It's not going to be church is not going to be an exception. So it would be lethal to fill up your car with gas because you're touching something somebody else touched, and it's going to be lethal.
Well,
no matter what.
But there is a significant difference between even going to the grocery store and going to a church. So they came out with a study just recently. I'm trying to think who did it. I don't remember. I can't call it. Anyways, they did a study. One of these universities, I believe it was, and it was Israel. Does his camera need to go up?
No, just see if.
Hold on, we're going to adjust you a little bit.
Oh goodness!
Lower your microphone.
All right, whatever.
Your camera was had you cutting off your head.
Yeah.
All right. Anyways,
so don't move the camera. Just drop me down.
Yeah, exactly.
I know you wanted to sit higher than me.
Let me raise mine now.
I tell you what, these subliminal messaging.
No, yours is.
There you go. Now I feel sufficiently humble.
How's that? Are we good?
You want to raise just a little more your chair?
Not really.
Just sit up a little bit.
This
There you
chair
go.
doesn't allow you to sit up.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
Is it
Leans
comfortable?
back.
These are great chairs. I love these
I
chairs.
don't like them.
I love them.
Yeah, well, whatever.
Okay.
I'll make it. I might be a week before I get my back back. Anyway,
Anyways, Jerusalem, the university in Israel did a study, and that speaking loud speaking, expels
yeah,
the same
like
amount as
singing
much
and
as
what?
sneezing. So when you sneeze and when you sing, when you sneeze and you preach, they're the same as far as the amount of droplets that come out of you.
I believe that.
Yeah, and so there's a big difference between 100 people in a 1,000-foot square building, all singing, shouting, saying amen, whatever, speaking loud. It's not even shouting; it can just be speaking loud. And the amount of, I mean, you just if you could see it in color, it'd just be a huge fog of droplets. As the difference of that and people walking around quietly in a grocery store. I mean, there is a difference there, in that, and so
Yeah, but they don't have to touch everything. In other words, in the grocery store, everything's being touched.
Oh, yeah, I understand. I'm not saying it's without danger. I'm just saying that I understand.
Whereas
this.
you can go to church and do social distancing in family units or car occupant units all together, like we do in our church, and they're all together in the same, and they avoid.
Or in the parking lot, you mean? Like you're doing
Well,
there.
no, I'm saying we also have Wednesday night meetings in person.
Oh, okay.
And so we have little pockets of chairs, and they're all separated, and people know to come in wearing a mask and sit down, and then you can take off the mask and you can talk to each other and you can sing, but you're separated from people. And so I understand that there is some danger in the singing and the what have you, the speaking, but at the same time, you go to the grocery store, you're grabbing a box of Cheerios or whatever. Somebody else just put that box on there, or somebody else just moved that box to get to something else. And my goodness, keeping grocery stores open, it was a huge decision by our government. They say, let's keep those open because they're necessary. And yeah, in a sense they are. But at the same time, why keep a grocery store open and you can't have, you can't have a daycare open, or you can't have a barbershop open or something. To me, it's very arbitrary in the way they're making these decisions. I don't know, and I don't know that they're wrong. As far as I know,
understand what you're
they're
saying.
doing their absolute best to protect us, and they have good motives. I'm personally tired of it all. I'm almost ready to say let the virus have whatever it wants to have, and just keep going on with life,
Until
because
the devil the hindmost.
we just have to keep living, and I think anybody who is vulnerable should be proactive and take care of themselves. But I don't think we should put the burden on everybody else to make sure vulnerable people don't get sick, because that it changes the whole nature of life itself and the nature of responsibility. So we have old people in old folks' homes. Well, I think people ought to be very careful to take care of those, that we don't harm them, and that they should also take responsibility not to be harmed. So they do that. They restrict visitors and what have you. And I understand that. But to say that healthy people who aren't at high risk of this thing have to make all these kind of sacrifices, I think that's overstepping. And I think even if it becomes very lethal, even if we lose in the next 2 or 3 years the 2 million people they were worried about losing, even if we actually do lose them, I don't think we can logically, or what do you call it, strategically stop living. We can't stop interacting. We can't stop selling and buying, and unless we're all going to go back to the farms. We are in such a vulnerable situation as human beings all over the world now. Nobody, I mean, maybe 10% of the people in the world could supply their own food, but probably not even that.
I think it's only 3% are actually farming for all the world. I think that's what the
No, what I'm talking about, people who are not dependent upon grocery stores. I'm talking about people who are actually living. Like, I know some people in Mexico who are living in the mountains, and they do grow their own food. And
subsistence living farmers.
yeah, subsistence farming,
Yeah,
or whatever they call that. Yeah, but it's a very small percentage now. Everybody else depends upon grocery stores and the big supply chains, and we're so vulnerable because if that fails, I remember
Well, that is failing. That's why prices are going up, because the delivery mechanisms aren't holding up.
And then people die. Lots of people die. And when people start dying, then it's war. Then it's everybody's defending themselves. We're in a terribly vulnerable situation in the world. It's amazing that anybody can get any sleep at night because it's coming. I mean, seriously, they got to stop thinking about it because it's coming.
Well, I have audience members, a couple of them that get all paranoid about this. So you're probably you're feeding their nightmares.
I have no real fears. I just really, I see the future and I can see that it's bad. It's really bad. But at the same time, I don't have that tendency to fear. I'm not afraid of the future, whatever it's going to happen. I'm ready to die, and I'm actually ready for my family to die if that's what happens, if that's what God wants. I know my limitations, and so that's my outlook. But it's not everybody's outlook, and if people think about what's happening, they would be very.
It seems to me that even if you have an attitude like that, like what you're expressing, at the same time, you have to, as a pastor, you can't have it for others. You can only have it for yourself.
Of course not, right.
And
no, but you can encourage others to have more of that attitude.
Right,
because
you can teach and preach that, but when it comes time to your perspective of how you deal with other people, it seems to me you can't have that viewpoint for them.
Like, I don't care if you die.
Yeah.
I'm not really worried about whether you die or not.
You know, for you to die is gain.
Yeah, but I'm talking about the outlook, the long-term, eternal outlook of Christians, that every Christian ought to have this outlook. And that is that there's no solution in the world. This world is not the solution. And there's no going to be any solutions, and the world is going to end badly. So, yeah, it's, in my mind, it's an outlook that I got when I was 17 years old, and it hasn't gone away. I haven't lost that attitude. It's like I realize what life is about, and it's not about having a good life here. That's not what it's about, even though I've had a very good life here.
Yeah. Yeah, we don't know what we're going to do. We're right now we're doing online and trying to do some type of an open meeting where people send in videos, and then we play the video on the stream. People that send them in and do things like that, but
nothing's going to be satisfying.
Well, it's not going to be the same. But my thing is, I'm not sure that there isn't a way to do something. I'm looking at it, put aside the government issue, like I said, and only look at and say, let's say this virus actually turns as deadly as worse than any worst case scenario. And then what do you do? And I don't know. We don't have a building, so it's not like we have a lot of options. And most people don't even have enough room in their house for.
The truth is, you might have more options than the people with buildings. It's surprising to me how, if your mind would just open, what options there are. Because remember in Mexico, man, we were meeting in parks.
Well, you're not going to do that here if they're outlawing gatherings.
Well, if they're outlawing gatherings, people are going to gather. I think you're not going to stop people from gathering.
Well, they'll stop them in the parks. You know, I mean, you're out there in the open.
Well, okay.
But I'm saying
backyards.
Right.
You know,
no, I understand what you're saying. I'm just making clear that, I mean, churches in Mexico that are meeting in the parks.
I think people are hamstrung by their prosperity. They're hamstrung by their what do you call it? Their empowerment.
Well, money's interesting when you put it into any type of scenario like this. But let's say the ministry. In one way, money gives you a lot of power to do something because you have money, but it also robs you of a lot of innovation, because when you don't have money, you figure out ways to get around it, and you end up coming up with better solutions.
Truly.
Right? If you had a lot of money when you were a missionary, when you were starting out,
that would have been a completely different missionary.
You'd have been a very different one. And because you could have done what you did with money, but you probably would not have.
I probably would not have, no. Well, and that's not even necessarily true, because a lot of what we innovated in Mexico was not because we lacked money, because we still had more money than just about anybody else down there.
But a lot of it was because you understood the difference between those who had it and those who didn't.
I could see that, yes.
Because you had a you understood that relationship where you may have had more than the people you were ministering to, but you had less than the people you ministered with.
Right. No, and I personally think it was God's leading. You find out you are hamstrung. You are, what do they call it? Disabled by your own prosperity. You're disabled by your thinking. Even thinking about money can disable you. Thinking about needing money. I think so many ministries in the United States are handicapped because it's all revolving around money. Just the idea of storehouse tithing, where the church feels like success in the church is gathering a lot of money and getting enough people who would tithe to the church. Then the pastors or the leaders of the church can do what they need to do with that money. It creates a false sense of what the church is. And I don't find it in the Bible. I don't see that. And I know that's sort of heresy in some circles, but in my mind, you're completely liberated when you stop the thinking of storehouse tithing, and the church starts aiming at what it's really supposed to be. And it's not about gathering money and using money to do God's work. We ought to be doing God's work whether we have money or not. And money actually hinders you from thinking that way.
It can. It does most of the time. I mean, most companies, let's just look at it from a standpoint of business, and most companies, when they get wealthy, stop innovating. It's seldomly. That's why they end up dying. They do when they're poor, have a little money. They
like
innovate.
Sears Roebuck, they had the catalog, and they had catalog sales all the way up into the 80s, maybe early 90s. It was a powerful thing, and you could buy almost anything. I remember in the 70s, I would go into the Sears catalog and find what I needed and buy it and order it in 2 or 3 weeks. It was the perfect setup for them to transition into the Amazon world.
Yes, they could have been Amazon.
And they could have been the Amazon if they could have just seen a couple of years ahead. And they decided to cut the catalog exactly at the moment when they should have been expanding the catalog to online thinking. And then they would have been the Amazon of the future.
They just couldn't see. They
couldn't see.
They couldn't see the new technology, and they.
And
had
it's hard to see. Not to criticize them. It is hard to see.
And there's technologies. To be fair, there's technologies that come and go all the time that never pan out. I mean,
it's true also.
And so it's not like in 1990 the internet was obvious.
No, it was not obvious.
It's like you think about it, you think, well, we're going to have this internet and everyone's going to connect. And it's like, well, how is everyone going to, even up until till 2001 when the iPhone came out, the idea of everybody connected all the time was still a pipe dream. You still had to have a landline, really.
That's true.
When the iPhone came out, and then now every single person is connected in the whole world, it's astounding.
It's a new world, and I am completely unprepared for what's coming. I don't have any idea what we're going to have to do. I just know that God has led us in the past, and that we really don't have to be afraid, because I assume He's going to lead us in the future. And look where the church has been most persecuted or most disabled, lacking money, lacking freedoms, they are the most powerful church right now in the world. Mm-hmm. They say the fastest growing church is in Iran right now. Iran is the fastest growing Christian body in the world, and it's growing completely under the radar.
How do they meet? Like China, Iran? Because, in some ways it's very similar. We should be maybe looking at them, taking some cues, because, ours isn't necessarily government persecution. It's this virus maybe, but it's very similar in its effects. So how are they meeting? Do you have any idea?
I really don't know. I know they meet in small groups, and I know they meet in private homes, just like they did in the Bible. But I don't know, what their strategy is.
Don't they in China kind of have like informal? Isn't in China they have no schedule for their meetings? They just they sort of just all show up at a house, a bunch of people, and they just have a meeting or something like that. I heard.
China's probably different because China is so huge, and it's got a real apparatus from the state to try to control things, but it's just huge. And also China has a lot of regional differences, strong cultural differences. With China is not one country. China is probably 10 big cultures, and they're held together by force by this communist, and they were before that by the dynasties and by the British Empire, and all of these things held this country as one country. It's really not one country. And so you'll have in one city, you'll have loyalties that are divided. And so you do have the Communist Party loyalty, and then you also have, say, the Uyghur loyalty in one area, and then you have the Tibetan, and you have all kinds of different cultures, and even language. There's 2 major languages in China, and probably a lot more than that. But and I'm not an expert on China. I just know that it's not that easy for a central government to control when people have a divided loyalty. It's like Texans. There's groups in Texas, groupings in Texas, where you and me would trust each other. We would know each other and trust each other. and somebody else would have their own grouping, and you could have, it could be based on any kind of loyalty. It could be, they're both members of the NRA and that's their loyalty. They know each other or whatever. And so the church then becomes that kind of a loyalty group. And so, yeah, they've got their ways of meeting. And I guess we have that same thing too. We know who we fit with. We all sort ourselves into these little groups. So how can the government really control it? They have to make these big decisions like you can't buy or sell unless you have the mark. Then when they make these big decisions, then you have to decide.
Yeah. Yeah, it's going to be interesting. We're trying to figure out what it looks like going forward. We're pretty sure that I'm pretty sure the YMCA is not going to open up, at least not for us. They're not opening up anytime soon.
Yeah, I wouldn't count on that. Yeah.
And I don't think they're opening up for churches for a
Well,
long
why
time.
don't you guys think about doing house churches, like they did in the Bible?
Well, that goes back to what we're saying. There's a lot of members in our church who are very sticklers for the rules, and the rules say you're not supposed to have that many people in a size.
Well,
of
the
house.
idea
Even
that we
my
had,
house.
even at the start of house churches, was that you have isolated groups. In other words, the church would be divided in, and we even made the point clear when we divided up into these. We had, I think, 7. We made 7 different groups, and we made it clear that you might adjust which group you're going to at first according to what's most convenient, but then you've got to stick. You got to stay with that group because that provides you the isolation, that provides you that separation, so that even though
you're
you're in a group
transmitting
of 20 people, that group of 20 people is isolated. It's cellular, and so it's not going to transmit. If it gets an infection, if it gets an outbreak, it wouldn't mess the other groups up because there's no interplay between them except online or what have you. And yet you still have your church group.
Yeah. That's the main thing is that we have a number of people in the church that would be very uncomfortable with that, and they're not going to meet anywhere.
That we noticed that too.
Yeah. And I'm not that way. If we would have had a building or somewhere, if we would have had a building of our own, I would have just kept holding meetings. Whoever wanted to show up, I would have. I don't know that my coworkers would have. They would have made their own choices, but that was my view from the very beginning. I've never thought the virus wasn't deadly. I never thought the virus wasn't deadly. I have no idea. I'm not a virologist. I have no clue. To me, it's like, well, what are you going to do? Are we just all going to go in our houses and roll over and die? I mean, what are we going to do? It's not something we can run from. It's not going to go away. It's not like if we all quarantine. If they could say, look, we're going to quarantine the country for 40 days, and then the virus will die and we'll not worry about it again, well, then that might be worth it. But that's not at all.
Well, that's what they did in China.
Back again.
They just shut. Yeah, it is. They just shut that one city down.
Yeah, they just shut it down
and
again.
locked people into their door.
Yeah, welded the door
rooms.
shut.
They could not come out, and they just died. They died in their room alone.
Yeah.
And that stopped the outbreak. But man, we're not willing to go that.
Well, it's back again. They just shut them down again.
It's going to keep coming back.
It'll keep coming. Yes, this isn't going away. I mean,
that's why you need to go ahead and build up your herd immunity, which is a worldwide. It's got to happen, just like smallpox. When it came into the new world, it just wiped them out because they didn't have any immunity to it. But now they do, and of course it's not worth it. It's not like you could say, well, we can lose 90% of our population, and then we'll be better off because we have herd immunity.
No, that doesn't work.
That doesn't really work, not mathematically.
Yeah, that's not exactly.
And that's what they're trying to do with this virus now. They're trying to keep us from losing too many. They're trying to balance the amount of loss with something that's acceptable.
Right now, one of the problems I think some people have, is that you look at the median age of the people dying from the virus, and it's higher than the median age of people who die normally. The people dying, the median age of people dying is like 81. And the median age of people who die normally is 80.
Yeah, but you got to watch out for statistics because statistics become confusing. What is median? What is average? What is, it's, you have to be careful how people use statistics. Mm-hmm. And so they might say, well, see, this proves this. And I'm not convinced that it proves that.
Right.
So, yeah, I know that this virus is lethal by my own research. I did not trust the news services. I went and looked it up and got my own research on it and found out that where the outbreaks are, it is genuinely increasing the death rate by orders of magnitude.
Right.
It's huge. And so wherever they have practiced all these rules and it hasn't had an outbreak like that, they've done something right. It's not unreasonable. They just have to balance out our civil liberties and, the rights. And I don't think they've quite got that figured out yet.
I don't know if they can. I don't know
You
that
don't
they
think
can.
it's possible?
I don't think it's possible. I think that in order to control something like that, you're going to have to be tyrannical. And if you don't want to be tyrannical, people
You're
are
gonna
like,
have to let people
you're
die.
just going to let people die. And there's no way to balance it. It's not a balance.
Well, it is a balance. You have to decide whatever your balance is. You're balancing the value of a life.
Well, what I'm saying you
to
can't
your
balance
liberties.
it is what I'm saying you can't balance is you're not going to be able to save lives and preserve liberty. I just don't see how that happens.
Well, that's why in the end of times, they're not talking about liberty. They're talking
No.
about peace and safety.
Yeah.
That's what the Bible says. They're going to be talking about peace and safety. And liberty goes the way of the...
Now you can't
Of
have
all
them
the
all.
earth.
I mean, this was observed even by the founders of the U.S. You can't be concerned
Can't
with
have
peace
it
and
all.
safety and love
And
liberty.
also liberty, right?
Yeah. It's
Give
one or
me
the other.
liberty or give me death. That's your choice. And
Yeah.
that's our choice today.
Yeah. And I think that there's still a lot of people that have this illusion that they can be safe and they don't want to have anybody dying that they love, and at the same time, freedom to do whatever they want. And it's just they're not being reasonable.
They're incompatible, and they will have to. You have a trade-off. You give up some for the other. And every one of our decisions in life is a trade-off. You're giving up something for something else. So, and that has to do with your value
And a
system.
big problem, you can look at the problems that the government and the media have in reporting this, government in dealing with the media and reporting it, but people have a very short-sighted view, is that they're like, nobody died today, and I went out yesterday. Well, it takes time. It's like, I listen to them, they're like, no one's died in 2 weeks, now we can all go out. And like, as soon as you do that, it's going to spike.
And we have such an insulated and almost mentally ill population, in that they do not see the important things. They see only the short-sighted, the emotional rather than the real. Mm-hmm. I feel like wherever, and that's Europe, and that's why socialism is so big, because they're only seeing the less important things. There's a collective mental illness in humanity, in what we're seeing.
Yeah, I think you're right. All right, let's move on. I wanted to get you on here and talk about a little bit about evolutionary biology, or I guess kind of on the side. It's not really about that, but I've been listening to a number of. I sent you a link, I think, on this.
I listened to it.
Yeah, so I've been listening to a
Forgive
number.
me, I listen to it double speed.
I do too.
I can't sit there for 3 hours and listen to these things.
That's what I love about these sites, these YouTube and stuff, is you can do that. You can put it on
double speed
and
is wonderful. Yes.
and just get the information, right? You're not looking for entertainment value. Anyways, I listened to a lot of these. That was just one sample of them.
That's the only one I listen to.
Yeah, I listen to a lot of these people. I like listening to them. I like hearing what they have to say. I don't agree with practically anything they say, but it's interesting to me. But one of the things I notice from these evolutionary biologists and people that lean that way is that, and this is a feature of evolution, I guess, is that they explain everything. For them is explained through evolution, because they don't have anything else. I mean, that's what they have to explain the world. If you're going to explain how things come about in the world, it's going to be through biological evolution.
No, see, I don't see evolution as explaining anything.
Oh, I'm not saying it is. I'm saying that's how they see it. I'm not.
But even they are not explaining anything by evolution. Is the starting assumption. They have the evolutionary assumption, and then they try to explain phenomena according to natural selection or other natural means. But the idea of evolution, it's either it's a semantical problem that we're having, or it's a hoax or whatever. The idea is that evolution itself is an explanation of anything. It's not. It's not an explanation. Evolution is the idea that stuff just happens. It's not even a reasonable hypothesis, evolution. Now, if you're talking about evolution in a very narrow sense, like natural selection by reproduction, if that's what you're talking about, evolution, then we narrow down what the word means. But evolutionary biology is no explanation for anything.
So when I listen to them, we'll talk about them for a minute. So when I listen to them, I have a lot of issues with the way they explain things, and that I feel they are, like you're pointing out, I think they are very loose with their terminology. And I suspect it could be, to be fair to them, I suspect it could be because most of the stuff I listen to is not an academic lecture they're giving. They're not in academia giving a lecture. So maybe they're not being technically accurate in their terminologies. I don't know. It could be. I don't know. I've never heard them there. Where I hear them is like on podcasts and stuff. They're talking to a very broad general audience. And so perhaps they're being technically inaccurate. But like when I listen to Brett Weinstein talk about it, he's talking about evolution and how evolution will explain, for instance, in this case, promiscuity. It will explain fornication.
No, natural selection explains promiscuity. Evolution doesn't explain anything. Evolution is
Is that what you're saying, or is that what you think he's saying?
None of them can give any evolutionary explanation. See, explanation is like Charles Darwin says on the origin of species.
What I'm asking though is this your assessment or
No, what I know of
is?
evolution, I'm just telling you what I know of evolution and they use the word and they pretend it's like a bait and switch.
I agree.
It's a bait and
That's what I'm
switch.
asking. I want to know if you're telling me this is what they're saying, or are you telling me what you think.
If we're going to
about what they're
use
saying?
the term evolutionary biology, then we can use it in the sense of they suppose this, and that's fine. But as an explanation, there's no explanation. There's no explanation whatsoever of any origin. For example, what's the origin of sex? What's the origin of sexual reproduction? Evolution doesn't explain that. You have to already have it for evolution, for natural selection to even work. So evolution is not an explanation for anything. Evolution is a bait and switch, where they have this philosophy that some progress is automatic. It's just natural. It's because of the laws of nature. Things are going to progress, going to go from simple to complex. I find that insulting in an intelligent way. That's not even close to being rational or reasonable. And yet they have this belief almost religiously, and then they bait and switch where they start talking about the minor things of natural selection. And you can only select what already exists. It's not an origin at all. So they're not telling you where, like in your sense of morality, they're not telling you where altruism comes from, because you have to have an altruistic behavior for it to be selected. They can show you the mechanics of how altruism might get there, might make a group or a species advance or procreate. They might see how altruism helped them, and they can sort of explain that. But that's the bait and switch when they say this is evolutionary. This is not evolution at all. Evolution is the idea that something originates by accident or by, and it's just not true. There's not one example of it in all of nature and in all of history.
No, I agree.
Of something just happening.
So as an editorial on what they say, I agree completely. But as far as representing what they're saying, I think I'm being accurate in what they're saying, and that they are. When I listen to them, they don't. Again, they may not be using the technical language they should, but what their statements are is that evolutionary biology is their explanation for everything, and that's how they. It's explanation for psychology. I'm not agreeing with this.
I just object to that.
I do too.
I object to the way they're. I don't think they're using the terms carelessly. I think it is a bait and switch. It might be subconscious, but it is a bait and switch.
Well, I'm willing to accept that also. I can suspect that as well, but to give them the benefit of the doubt, then I say what I said. And so it's not that I agree with them. I'm trying to understand where they're coming from.
Go where you were going, because I'm
so yeah. No, I don't
I'm
agree.
getting sidetracked here because I cannot stand.
Oh, that's fine.
I cannot stand the dishonesty.
Oh, I agree.
Of so-called scientists.
Well, see, I have talking about. Let's talk. I don't. We have nowhere to go. So the like the bait and switch thing that you're talking about. Another example of that is they will take and talk about microevolution, which is adaptation, which I think most people accept. Yeah, that happens. You get
Microevolution is natural selection. It's the process of a species or a group benefiting from a natural variation. But this variation already existed.
Yes.
And so microevolution is not evolution. It's
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 adaptation.
utilitarian adaptation of whatever exists.
That's right.
And it could be recessive genes or recessive DNA. DNA that doesn't present itself in the parents, but then does present itself in a child.
Right. And so they'll talk about that.
But that's not evolution.
I know, but that's my point. So they'll talk about that. And then it's in the context of macroevolution. And so they'll talk about all this microevolution
Exactly.
in the context of macroevolution.
It's like Charles Darwin using was it Charles Darwin that used the moths in England where the Industrial
I think he
Revolution
was.
changed it? If not, it was right in that time period.
He did similar. He did the little
and he
finches
used, and then you come up and find out that no, but that's not evolution at all. That doesn't show anything. All of those variations already existed in that genome, and whatever it was, the DNA was already there. The information was there. I think there's 3 different ways that we can get new information into DNA, and one is mutations, and one is drift, and there's another, but they're so minor. And even if there is an actual example of mutations causing an actual new organ or a new capability or some advantage, even if that actually exists, and nearly all the cases that they will mention, it's not true. It's not real. Speciation gets rid of DNA information. It never adds it. Whenever natural selection works, it's selecting. And what happens is if it selects consistently over generations, the DNA that is not used, or it does not provide any value, disappears. It's just by the law of replication, where you only get half every time, and so it winds up disappearing. So then it becomes a species because it cannot revert back. It doesn't have that information in their DNA. And that is the exact opposite of what the theory of evolution posits, and that is that all of this variation is increasing DNA information, and it's not. It's completely the opposite.
It's specializing. It's not making it more.
So it's not just a
generic or
bait and
complete.
switch of similar things. It's a bait and switch of opposite things. So they're saying that DNA is improving by the process of evolution, which is just a philosophy, and it's a philosophy that existed way before Darwin. This is pantheism. It's been since forever that stuff just happens, and this philosophy has found some kind of a way to bait and switch and pretend that what Charles Darwin showed was an origin of something. And what Charles Darwin showed was genius. Charles Darwin is the best evolutionary writer out there. If you've read his book, it's the best one out there. It is so convincing but it doesn't show origin of anything. And that's what messed him up. In fact, his idea of origin was disproven the same decade that he wrote that thing. It was disproven scientifically by Gregor Mendel. And Gregor Mendel was just completely ignored because it wasn't conforming to, they say that it was just because he was an obscure monk or whatever. No, he was a published author. This guy was a genius scientist, and he discovered the laws of inheritance, and he proved it, and yet for 30 years they rejected him and ignored him and all of his arguments, to the point that he was ostracized and not published and forgotten. But not because what he said was wrong, but because it did not follow the novel Darwinian thesis that and everybody believed in those days that this process of variation was actually improving or giving us new information, making new organs. Like, if a fish doesn't have a lung, if given enough time and enough variation, whatever, it'll develop a lung. And now we have our trachea and our lungs are into the same opening, and that's because of an accident of evolution, because they both came from the same organs. And this is just such nonsense. It's not rational. It's not reasonable. It's not scientific in any way. And so when they say evolutionary biology, that is pure nonsense. Unless they mean by evolution your microevolution, which is nothing else than selection of variations that already exist.
Okay, so I agree with your assessment of how they are, but my point is, going back to what we're saying, is that I listen to these, and there's a lot of them that are there. They're not all biologists. Some of them are psychologists and different ones, and they all are using evolution and however they explain it. and whatever opinion we might have of how they explain it, but they're all using that to explain now far beyond speciations, far beyond the differences between, you know, what organs animals have or what organisms exist. Now it's almost like they've decided that discussion's been won, I think is how they basically see it. And they are moving on into trying to explain all human behavior through this same mechanism, which I think is ridiculous. It's very crazy. But my problem, and this is what I wanted to ask you about, because I've been thinking about it and I can't figure it out.
When you say ridiculous, you mean...
I don't think that there's even granting them every
Because
benefit
obviously
of the doubt.
some of our physical traits and even our mental traits can be traced to natural selection and genetics.
Yes, but when we try to then trace moral traits and moral values to that,
Well, in
I
as
find
much
that
as
very,
morality
very
is
hard.
utilitarian, then it would follow the same
I don't know. I don't know
trajectory.
that. I don't know that it would. I don't know that they can prove that it would. I find it that they're
Well, it is dangerous when the same theory can explain anything and its opposite. And that's a real danger, because if you can explain, I saw a TED talk, one of this fella who was a scientist, or I guess he was a scientist, I'm not sure. Forgot his name, whatever. But it was about, he had a son who turned out to be homosexual. And so he did his study and he did some research on evolutionary, and he came up with not only is heterosexuality an advantageous trait so that it propagates, but he came up with a theory of how homosexuality is actually embedded by the evolutionary process. And of course, it's just nonsense when you can provide reasonable explanations of why both exist, why one is not selected out, and of course, homosexuality cannot propagate itself. It's the collective idea where it helps the group. So
well, that's one of the problems with how they speak about it, is that they speak of evolution because I think it's because they have no other language to do it to speak of it with, but they always speak of it as if it is a grand creator or design.
they do.
right?
They personify it.
Yeah, they
Yes.
personify
They
it
do.
immensely, and it's probably because there's no
Like
words
Dawkins'
for it.
selfish gene.
Yes.
And the genes are manipulating us. And he almost talks about the gene as if it's our superior,
Yes.
our little gods
Yes,
that are telling us what to do.
That's right. You're right. That evolution desires, evolution has a goals, evolution.
Yes, that's exactly right.
And they know it's problematic because many times they'll go, well, it's not that evolution does this, but I guess because it's a feature of language, they really don't have words to describe something with that type of reach and scope and grasp that is at the same time ambivalent about it. Right?
But no, it's not even that. It's that they don't want to admit that those words are accurate. In other words, like I read this one evolutionist, it was like a textbook for children, whatever, and it was written by evolutionists. And it said in there, you could see several times in there where the normal word would have been believe. It's easy to believe in evolution because of whatever. And they had to change that word to it's easy to think about evolution or whatever. You could see that they had gone back and edited it and gotten rid of all the words, the believe words. But belief was the accurate word. They were believing in evolution the same way we believe in God. It's a starting assumption. They
Correct.
hold that truth to be self-evident. Starting assumption.
So what I'm saying though is that these guys they go and they explain moral or immoral or human behavior is now all explained through an evolutionary lens. So if you listen to any of these evolutionary psychologists and the evolutionary biologists, like the link I sent you, all human behavior is explained through the evolutionary lens. So why do people seek to be at the top of a hierarchy? Well, that goes back to lobsters in the case of Jordan Peterson, and it's millions of years old. And there's this evolutionary system that has evolved within all creatures, or many creatures, and on and on and on. And yeah, it's very interesting.
Well, how in the world then would they account for morality that does not help? Like for example, taking care of invalids or taking care of old people.
No, there is nothing that isn't accounted for by the
That's the problem with a theory that can explain anything and its opposite.
Well, it's a problem with having a theory that is the ultimate end. I mean, they can't have anything beyond evolution, because then that would be God.
Well, that's true.
So that is the end of their search, and so it has to explain everything.
No, but how can you by natural selection, explain our moral sense that we need to take care of our old people.
No, I know it's hard. I don't know.
There's
I mean, they try, but that's my point. They try to explain everything.
or how
way.
how my genes are manipulating me to help you so that your
Altruistically.
genes would be propagated. That does not make any sense. It's not.
No.
It's like they're making a huge leap here of logic that does not follow.
No, exactly right. That's my point. That's what I'm trying to get to. So by pointing out what they're saying, I'm not agreeing with them, but this is where they're at. This is where, and it's not just, these aren't just wackies. These aren't the little crackpots out there. These are, as far
I think
as
you give them too much credit. I really do. I think they're wackos. I don't think they're thinking straight.
well, that may be
In
true,
fact,
but
I think that they are a part of a mass delusion.
I would agree with that from my perspective, but from a populist perspective, these are not the ones that are considered crackpots. These are the leading thinkers of the world.
You mean like Richard Dawkins?
Dawkins, Weinstein.
I think he's the victim of tremendous mass delusion. He is deluded in the way he thinks.
but that's
he calls
from a
it the
Christian
God
perspective.
delusion.
Not that I'm disagreeing with you.
No, I'm saying it not even from I'm glad that Christianity and the Bible gave me the foundation on which to be able to make those kind of judgments. That's great, and I'm all for it. But I think that irrespective of the Bible, the evolutionary concept is not defendable. It is not scientifically viable. It's a dead end.
Okay, so here's the problem with that, and to a point I agree with you, and to a point I think that there's something to be discussed there. So the problem I have with that assessment is that even if that were true, I've listened to a lot of debates. Those people are basically willing to debate anybody, not all of them, but most of them, and I don't see them lose very many debates from my perspective.
Man, I've only seen him lose. Like Dawkins, I haven't seen him win a debate, and he won't even debate people like Lane Craig and
No, he won't.
He knows his limitations. I don't see any of them winning a debate. I don't
do.
see Sam Harris or Christopher Hitchens.
I
They don't win
see-
debates.
Now I see certain believers like William Lane Craig, who does very well up against about any of them. But I've listened to a lot
Because he's
of
as
their
obtuse
debates.
as they are.
Well, I
he
like
can
him.
confuse them. He runs them in circles.
He talks their language
Yes, he
and he
does.
plays their game, which I have no problem with. I like William Lane Craig a great deal. I respect what he's doing. It's not maybe my approach, but
He's too theological in some ways, I think. He's
But-
too philosophical.
well, that's what he is. He's a philosopher.
That's right.
And that's what he's debating them on their terms in many ways.
In some ways, he's forcing them to debate him on his terms.
And that he's doing too. And but I do not think that I would have the ability to stand with them in a debate and prove that they're wrong. I don't think I have. And so in that sense, these aren't lightweights. Now, I think that their ideas are completely wrong. I think their views are delusional, but I can't prove it most of the time. And I don't find many people being able to, which I find very disheartening. I find that problematic for Christianity. It's like, why have we fallen behind in this way?
Well, I don't think we've fallen behind. In fact, I
So
think
who is? So who is able to
man, just
discuss
about
with
anybody
them on that
who's
level?
doing it. I see it all the time.
like who? Because I've listened to them. There's not very many that do it very well. I mean, I listen to them all day.
Oh well, there's all kinds of people that are standing up for, like, the intelligent design crowd. They hold their own with them all the time. Stephen Myers and
But that many of them are not arguing against what there's these.
No, they believe in evolution.
Intelligent. They believe in evolution.
yes, they do.
Yeah, and so
So
they're
you're saying a pure Bible standpoint. How can we stand up to?
Well, that's not what I wanted to
that
talk
kind
about
of
today, but yes, I mean that is a problem I have with this. It's a secondary issue. We'll get back to this, but what I really am concerned with isn't what they're saying. I look at them and they have what they consider to be, and what they're trying to make be an explanation for, say, human behavior. Let's just keep it
As
narrow.
deluded as it is.
Whatever, I'm not, yeah, and even though I don't agree with it, but they have this explanation. Why do men catcall girls? Why would a man be promiscuous? Why is there fornication? Well, they have an answer for that. They have an explanation for it, and their explanation is that it's a low risk, high reward function of getting your genes into the future.
And I think that's correct.
You
but
think
that's
so?
natural selection.
You think that's why that happens?
I think that's why that happens, because of natural selection. In other words, all of us have built into us the fleshly side, which is, and of course, sin becomes the sinfulness. It's not even sinful in its basic, when it happens. It's not necessarily sinful. What's sinful is because of what God expects out of humans. He created us in a different way. We're not like all the other animals. So we do have the animal nature, and so when we follow our animal nature, that becomes sin to us because God expects more of us than he expects of, say, a dog. And so when they act like dogs, that's sinful, but it is explainable by natural selection. Natural selection is just taking care of our bodies. It's making sure our species continues. And so natural selection is utilitarian. It's going to, whatever makes the species continue, that's going to produce that. And that does work. It does work. But the morality that we have in our minds, that's not utilitarian. It's way beyond utilitarian. We understand morality not from the evolutionary standpoint, which is so utilitarian. It's not really morality. It's all evolutionary ideas about morality are ultimately denying real morality. They deny that it actually exists, and they might even say it's a utilitarian. In other words, religion helps people to propagate, so that's why religion exists in our species, because it makes people more. I mean, Catholics have more children than atheists. In fact, atheists are working themselves right out of existence because they have less than 1%. I mean, less than one child per higher educated. Higher educated people have less than one child, and lower educated people have 3.2 children, and Roman Catholics have 3.4,
79.
And Muslims have 5.2, and so evolutionarily they're losing big time because they're too smart for their own good, and yet that only explains the propagation of the species. It doesn't really explain morality. It just explains why religion exists in their mind, and it explains why men are after women.
So you believe men are after women and do these things because of wanting to procreate?
It's their animal nature. It's a built-in drive that natural selection augments. Natural selection forces that to be preeminent or prominent among our species, and it has to be. Otherwise, the species dies away. I mean, we need to want sex. Men need to want sex.
Isn't there a difference between wanting sex and wanting to procreate? Do you think there's a difference?
From the animal perspective, no man wants to procreate.
Because the evolutionists...
I did, but most men don't. That's not their idea.
These evolutionists, their view of this is that it's not about the sex or the pleasure of sex. It's about procreation. Or this isn't what the individual organism wants. This isn't what you might want.
We're being manipulated by our genes.
That's right. It is what evolution wants. Evolution wants to procreate, which is, again, goes back to where I think it's real silly how they're talking, because they acknowledge that it doesn't want anything, but it does. It wants to push its genes
Obviously,
into the future.
there's a mind behind what they consider evolution.
Yes.
There's a purpose. There's a goal. And they don't want to use those words. They say they're misusing them, but they're not.
They
using
might
them
see it to be a
appropriately.
cosmic law, that there's this cosmic law like gravity pushing
It's like when
everything
someone
there.
says, well, the universe has told me not to do such and such. And it's just because they don't want to say God or the spirit or, the spirit world or whatever. But that's what they mean. That's what they believe. They believe something is guiding them. And that's what evolutionists think. They think something is guiding it, even though they deny it.
So then going back to sin, do you think sin then is as artificial as, and I'll use the word, it's probably not the right word, but I'll use that word for lack of a better one. Do you believe that sin therefore is artificial in that it exists only because you're doing something God doesn't like you to do, or is there some inherentness in sin?
No,
that
inherent.
something is sin inherently.
Because God made us different than animals. And because he did, he had higher expectations of us. And sin is falling short, or coming short, as the Bible calls it. Sin is coming short. So whatever God's expectation of us was, when he created Adam and Eve, he obviously had specific ideas in mind. It's like over there in Genesis 2, and it says that God was with Adam, and he's in the garden. God made this beautiful garden, and Adam was keeping the garden. And then God walked around with Adam, and Adam was naming the animals and what have you. And it says, and God made all these animals this way, but there was not a help meet for Adam found among them. And it's almost like people think that God was looking at the animals to try to find something that would fit, but that's not what it means. It means God was going to make Adam's sexuality different than man's. Man's sexuality different than animal sexuality. And that was his entire plan. And so he created the woman out of the rib, and that's got symbolical reasons or whatever. I'm not sure why he did that. But one way or the other, what we know is that human sexuality is different than all animals. And all biologists know this. Human sexuality is different than all the other animals in a lot of different ways. For example, concealed ovulation and always sexual, even after menopause. It's a completely different kind of sexual system, and so God obviously has the baser, like back in the 1800s when they would say baser instincts or your baser nature, because even back then they understood, before even any of this natural selection stuff, they knew that men had both a baser, natural animal type of lusts and desires and a higher spiritual desire. And so when God created man, he made man different in his image with higher standards and higher desires and higher possibilities and tremendous power in procreation. That's the biggest power we have. So God makes these higher standards, and when men fall short, they don't come up to that standard, that's sin. That is the sinfulness of it, because it's a rejection of God's standard. It's a rejection of God's preeminence, or it's a rejection of God's, what do they call it? It's his person, it's his
prerogative.
It's his person, it's his purpose, and it's his preeminence. And so sin, it's amazing how sin divides up into three themes always, like the pride of life and the lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, and pride of life. And it's the aspiration is the pride of life. It's the affections, the lust of the eyes, and it's the appetite, which is the lust of the flesh. And so you have these different things that relate to sinfulness, whatever sinfulness is, and it has to do with how we react with our carnality, our flesh. It's how we react with earthly things, material matter, and how we react with spiritual, or the world as compared to God's kingdom, or matter as compared to earth as compared to heaven, or carnality as compared to spirituality, that sort of thing. In other words, sin or sinfulness in humans can only be among humans, because only humans can have that added expectation, that higher expectation. And we are created that way. It's not like, we were just created as animals and we were supposed to become better or whatever. No, God created us already with the capacity to know him and to appreciate him and to thank him and to honor him, and even to have fellowship with him. All of these things were part of and he was having fellowship with Adam. But you notice that Eve looks at the tree and thinks, oh, appetite, it's good for food. Affection, it's
pleasant to the eyes.
Pleasant to the eyes. And aspiration, it's going to make me wise. And so all of these things conflict with God's purpose and his preeminence and his person.
So when Paul talks about sin in Romans, he talks about it, and I'm curious what you think about this. So it seems, well, it doesn't seem, he personifies sin as being like something independent of a person, because he says it's not I that do it, but sin that dwelleth in me. He talks about sin at being dead.
You don't
but
think of
then-
that just as a general sinfulness, like a sin nature?
Maybe. That's what I'm asking you. So I looked through Romans.
A law in my members.
Yes.
It's like something's in my flesh that drives me to sin. And isn't that the same thing as Eve saying it's good for food?
So was there sin in her when she says that, or what is that? What are you saying?
I would
there?
say sin right there. It began right there when she says, "Oh, it's good for food." She's like they say back in the philosophers back in the 18th and 17th and 19th centuries. They say they're going after their baser instincts, and that was Eve. She started focusing on the baser instincts.
So it was sin before she even ate?
Before she ate, yes, absolutely. Sin was in the mind before she ate.
So if she hadn't have eaten, it would have been the same? She would have still been a sinner?
She still would have been a sinner. It's a guess. I don't know how God would, drop the hammer.
How you'd adjudicate that?
But from my mind, sin begins in the lust. It's conceived.
Anyway, so in Romans 6, the reason I was saying in Romans 6, I understand what you're saying, and that could be. But when you read Romans and Paul's talking about sin, it just seems like he is setting sin as being something external that has some power outside of yourself as well, like having a kingdom. But with
You
I
mean
should
like
say
the
power.
devil's kingdom.
Maybe I don't know. That's what I'm asking you. How you look at that, or is this just a rhetorical device of how it's because he talks about it, that sin is dead, but then the law comes, the law becomes the
Well, he
executioner
speaks
of
of sin
sin.
as a law. That sin is a law, and sinfulness is in me. It's in my members.
But in a way, he separates it from himself. He says, "It's not I, but
No, it's
sin."
only because he's saved, and now he's dead. Because he's dead in Christ, it's no longer I that do it. It was him that was doing it.
So when he says, "Before the law came, sin was dead, but then the law came and sin revived, and then I died," when is that? Where do you think?
That's when he
that?
understands the commandment. When he reaches that supposed age of accountability, he gets to the point where he understands the commandment and he makes a decision. Then sin revives. That doesn't mean there was no sin in him. Just like we know that sinfulness existed before sin is imputed, because there's no law, there's no imputation of sin. So, but sinfulness existed, and sinfulness still exists, and so. Even when he was a baby, his sinfulness was there. It had to be revived. It was dead because there was no law and there's no way to impute it. There was no way to apply it. He couldn't even understand it. But as soon as he understood the commandment and broke it, even broken it before he actually did something physical, it's in his mind. It says, "Thou shalt not covet." And he coveted. And so, then he's sinful. I mean, then sin is revived. Sin becomes active, I guess. And this is all philosophy. You want to understand this? Read Packer or read John Owen or Martin Luther or John Calvin. These people deal with those kind of things. Back in the day, before we got so focused on matter, the material world, people were much more focused on the mind and the spiritual world, and so they dealt in all of this. Scientific materialism has sort of sidetracked us, and now we don't spend much time thinking about these bigger issues, and that's probably sin. It's probably sinful because it has to do with matter. It has to do with the opposition of earth and heaven. Something's earthly and something's heavenly, and we are focused on the earthly.
So when you talk about the tree, and I wanted to ask you about that also. So Eve is looking at the tree, the knowledge of good and evil. I had Josh Kennel on the podcast a few weeks ago, and we talked a little bit about that. He has a very peculiar view as to what that is. His view is, what was that? Oh yeah, his view is that it is metaphorical for that Adam and Eve killed an animal. That's what that means. Yeah, it's very odd.
No, I don't believe that.
Well, I don't either. But anyways, I had him on, and so that I started talking. But what do you think is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil?
It's speculation because he doesn't go into it, but because we know how he created, we know he had the tree of life, and that was to be eaten right away. and we assume that this tree was in the center of the garden, so it was preeminent in God's mind, so the knowledge of good and evil was something that Adam and Eve were going to receive eventually. God was saying, not yet, not right now. And he didn't say not yet. He said, you don't eat of this tree. As far as we know, that's all he said. He might have said much more. The Bible's somewhat cryptic sometimes, and so it doesn't give you all the information. But just reading between the lines, in my mind, the tree of knowledge of good and evil is something that was for Adam and Eve eventually, someday. And then you get into the realm of speculation, what that's supposed to mean. What did Adam have any ability to understand good and bad and right and wrong before he ate of the tree? I think he did. I don't see how it could be possible for him to be able to name animals and appreciate beauty and things like that without also having the ability to judge between right and wrong. I mean, it's basic to our natures. All people judge right and wrong.
And so then what would that be? If he already had let's assume, and I understand this is speculative. I'm not trying to pin anyone to something. I'm just curious about it. But if somebody, because this is the questions I have. So if Adam and Eve have some discernment already, which to me it's apparent they did. Like Eve, the devil says, you could eat of that tree, and she says, oh no, that would be wrong. Well then, how is what is the knowledge of good and evil and what did that? I just don't.
Well, the devil said it's going to make you like gods, and I don't know if the devil's telling the truth, but his idea of
God says they've become like one of us, doesn't he?
He does say that afterwards to confirm. He didn't say that before.
No, but he shuts down the garden.
He says they have become like us. Yes.
And now let's keep them from the tree of life.
So something about the tree of good and evil brought Adam and Eve to that next level, whatever that level is, of being like God. So they're created in his image, and his purpose is to get them. Obviously, the tree was for them eventually, in my mind. Mm-hmm. And so he wanted them to get to that point, but just not yet. So
how likely, or how, maybe likely is the wrong word, how possible or plausible might be the right word. How plausible is it that term, the knowledge of good and evil, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, is idiomatic, and that we're taking it a little bit too literally? Not that it's not a literal tree. No, that's not what I'm saying. But that the term, the way it's being called, is somewhat idiomatic. And
well, I'm pretty convinced that it's not an apple.
No.
And I'm also convinced that it's not a grape.
Yeah, that's not the question. The question is, it's naming it something that it just seems so. I wonder if our difficulty in maybe trying to understand a little better, as well as could be, what we're talking about is that we're taking the name a bit too literally, as opposed to taking it as a title or an idiomatic label. And
so that it could be metaphorical and actually talking about killing an animal?
Not that the tree, no. Not that the tree's metaphorical, but you can name something a name that really is not technically descriptive.
Well, would then the tree of life be also
That's what's interesting
metaphorical?
To me. Well, I don't think the trees are metaphorical. I'm not saying the trees are. I'm wondering if, and it's not that it's metaphorical.
Well,
the title,
were you saying symbolic? What was the word you used?
Idiomatic. In that you don't have a word that you could call something always. So you come up with something that's descriptive, but if you take it too literally with these types of titles, then you end up with a misconception.
So the possibility, or is it a plausible idea that the fruit of the tree of life was not actually a fruit?
No, not that. I'm not talking about the actual tree or fruit. I'm talking about what we're calling it. Because because we're saying it's the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and yet everyone I read, anyone I talk to, it's just very, very hard to nail down at all what we're even talking about. Because like you just said, they already had some knowledge of good and evil. So what is this? How is this different? And I just wonder if we're being too literal on what it's called instead of looking at this as a name.
I think, though, the treasure that we have here is what God called it. And so in my mind, anything that diminishes or takes us away from that treasure of his words, he called it the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. In my mind, whether it's descriptive, idiomatic, I'm not sure where that would take me. It causes me to stop respecting what it actually says, and what it actually says is the only treasure we have. We don't have the knowledge beyond that. All we have is what it says, and I'm not going to do anything. I'm not going to even go down a road that would let me lose what it actually says. And
That's the thing about if I'll just see it from my perspective. If I look at it as being idiomatic, you're not losing what it says. You're understanding what it says differently. Because you can have an idiom that taken together means something different than the individual words mean separately. That's basically what an idiom is. So if you take, a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush, that means something way beyond the words, and that's an idiom, right? It doesn't mean that you actually have a bird in your hand and that there's two in a bush. I don't think that's an idiom,
but I understand what you're saying.
So I'm just clarifying that when I'm saying that it might be idiomatic,
that's a metaphor, but it's not really an idiom.
Okay. Well,
raining cats and dogs might be an idiom.
Okay, fine. So again, that doesn't mean anything that the words say it means, but you don't lose the words by understanding what it means. You know what I'm saying?
In my mind, if you say raining cats and dogs, the words are basically useless. And if that's the case with tree of knowledge of good and evil, then we've lost it. It's like, okay, those words are useless. They don't tell us anything.
Well, do they tell us something?
I think they have to tell us something. That's why God used those words.
But then what do they tell us? I mean, I can't find anything that.
Well,
I can't find
just because we don't know what they tell us right now doesn't mean that there's no information there that might be useful. I mean, I've had things in my mind over the years just click, and all of a sudden I understood what I'd never understood before. Mm-hmm. And if I had gone down the road like so many new versions do, where they just try to make everything understandable, they're very careless with what the treasure is, and that's what God said, and they're being so paraphrasical that they are trying to make everything so understandable that then there's no more clicking, there's no more light bulb moments, because you've lost the key of knowledge. You've changed what it actually says. I think we ought to treasure what it actually says, and whatever that means. Speculation right now, even the speculation is valuable. What does that mean? The knowledge of good and evil. Does that mean the ability to distinguish between good and evil, or does that mean a practical knowledge of both, of the contrast? Or, all kinds of speculation might be available, but I think all of it needs to maintain their tight connection to the actual word.
Well, see, here I understand what you're saying, and I agree to a large extent. Here's the difficulty, and let's use this as an example of other one. There's other places I think like this, but the difficulty I have with how you're putting this together is that unless that means that when you eat that, you now know good and evil. To take it very literally, good and evil. If it means anything, if you think it could mean anything beyond or other than that, then you've made it idiomatic, because that's all it says.
No, not necessarily, because idiomatic, that has to do with it's a trick played by language. And so
well, the way I'm using idiomatic means that this is a phrase that is to be taken as a phrase and understood, not dissected to the individual word. That this is the name of the tree.
But the phrase is put together by the person who knew what he was talking about.
Yes.
And so that's the phrase he used. So that's what he wants us to understand. I have a problem with the idea of losing contact with the words.
Right, I understand what
it's
you're
like
saying.
If you're in the dark, you don't want to lose contact with the tool you're holding, because once you lose contact with it, you can't find the tool.
Mm-hmm. You know what's interesting? You brought up the tree of life. So, like I was saying, I had a discussion with Josh, and I think there's other people that think this way. I'm sure there are, that think that these trees are metaphorical, both of them, because they have such a hard time trying to figure out. This is Josh's perspective, is that it's so hard to figure out what they might be literally, which I just don't find anything in the text to assume they're anything but literal trees.
It's Pandora's box if they become metaphorical.
Exactly. I agree. But what's interesting to me when I was thinking about this and his conversation with him, is that it's so much easier for us, or at least for me, to conceptualize in my mind a literal tree of life. That's not hard at all for me. To like when I had my discussion, he's like, you're saying you think the tree of life is literal? I'm like, why not? He says, you mean a tree can give you life? Why not? It's not hard for me to think that there is an enzyme that you could eat
Exactly.
that could extend your life. Simple.
That could stop somatic.
I'm not saying that's
somatic
what it is.
mutations. Yes,
Yeah.
and you don't age anymore.
Yeah, I'm not saying that's what it is. I'm just saying, could I conceptualize in my mind a tree that you ate that fruit and you would just keep living?
Well, I'm saying that's
Not
what
hard.
it is, because it's very clear. It's like the first chapter of Genesis is, I think, very flexible, because there's several things written in it that they leave lots of things wide open. And when I first read it and I started seeing some things, I actually went studying other ideas of what it could mean, because it was so flexible in its language. But then you get to the second chapter and the third chapter of Genesis, and they become less flexible, because it has interactions between people and things that are happening. Then you get to the fifth chapter and on, and it's no longer flexible. It's saying things that you cannot reinterpret some other way. And so in my mind, the second and third chapters of Genesis you're talking about the tree of life and all that stuff. It's already lost the flexibility that you might have on the first chapter of how you might understand what's going on. And I know some people might be upset that I say that there's some flexibility on the first chapter.
Yeah, well, there will be.
but I know, and I don't treat it terribly flexible, because of the second chapter and the third chapter, which gets less and less. And then by the time you get to Noah, there's no more flexibility. You either believe it or you don't. In my mind, there's no flexibility about the flood. Either it happened or the Bible's telling us a story.
Mm-hmm. We have a couple questions.
Okay. Well, just before you do that, just to clarify. So when I said I'm not willing to say that's what it is, what I mean is the scientific, that there's an enzyme in there, that's how it worked. I don't know the mechanism. My point is that I think it's a real tree, a literal tree. And I think that it's not hard at all to conceptualize how a fruit could accomplish that.
I agree.
Now, my reason I'm pointing that up is it's almost impossible for me to figure out how the tree of life, tree of knowledge of good and evil would work. Not to say I don't think it's a real tree. Well, I actually don't think either tree is metaphorical or either fruit is. I think
put it in terms, and I'm not saying this is what it is.
Okay.
I'm just saying just put it in terms of the knowledge of good and evil being something practical. And for example, Adam and Eve were created mature. They were complete people. But that doesn't mean that they were sexually active or sexually mature. And an enzyme, you eat an enzyme that all of a sudden makes you desire sex. Wow, that would be a tremendous difference in their way of looking at each other. And they immediately knew that they were naked. So something happened when they ate that tree of life that caused the tree of knowledge, that caused something in their bodies to all of a sudden experience good and evil. The difference between flesh and spirit, the difference between fellowship with God and, hey, baby, that's sort of a very baser instinct type thing. That's not hard for me to imagine that something like that happened. And I don't know that that's what happened. I know that some people say that the serpent and Eve, had a relationship.
Well,
I don't believe that.
That's I don't know if it's the Catholic view, but it is
No, I did not know that.
It is a Catholic view. Now, I don't know that's the official.
I don't accept that. Only Catholic view I knew is that Eve ate an apple. I don't agree with that.
No, the Catholics tie the knowledge, and I say I want to be very careful. I don't know what the Roman Church says, but many Catholics I've dealt with tie the tree of knowledge of good and evil to sex. And
they might be trying to read too much into it. They might be becoming too mystical in their thinking about what the tree. Because you get all kinds of Bible teachers, and they will do all kinds of things about the knowledge of good and evil. Like Witness Lee, he used to have big studies on the difference between the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and how knowledge and I don't think it's anything like that. I think those are actual, something happened. God created a man and a woman, and he created them in a certain physical way, and the tree of life kept them alive and kept them healthy, and the tree of knowledge of good and evil was something that he was going to give them at the moment that would have, finished the thing he was doing in them. And whatever that is, whether it's sexuality, which, because he says they knew that they were naked, I think it has something to do with their sexuality. And sexuality is a huge part of humanity, or human life. And yet, at the time, you don't notice that there was any sexuality involved. They didn't even know they were naked. It wasn't part of their psyche. And all of a sudden then they knew. So something happened in that way. And in my mind, that keeps it simple, and it's not any bigger than that.
Well, I like that explanation a lot, the one you just gave on how a physical fruit might have an effect on that. I thought that was really good. What was our question?
So you have, would you say good and evil is different from right and wrong, or are they interchangeable?
Well, that would be for you.
This would be a very philosophical. Basically, anything I say would be very debatable. I know that I'm talking about basically the same thing: morality, ethics, right and wrong, good and evil. But my goodness, I'm very flexible on it. If somebody can point out a distinction between good and evil and right and wrong, I'm open to it, because we got all kinds of different fields that we can study. We can study legality. I'm in the legal field. I'm constantly studying the law of Texas and trying to figure out how to equate that into a Spanish speaker, And so in those contexts, right and wrong, and moral and immoral, and they have certain laws that have to do with moral turpitude, and then they have other laws that have to do with the laws of possession, and these are different. It's different. So depending on what you mean by the words, and anybody who uses the words could use them basically any way they wanted, and then you'd have to understand what they mean by the words that they're using. Basically, they have to define them themselves. Now, what he's saying there is the knowledge of good and evil. I don't think that's exactly the same thing as right and wrong, because I think they both knew the difference between right and wrong. I mean, I think the Bible says Adam was not deceived. He wasn't deceived. She was deceived, but Adam was not deceived. He knew what he was doing was wrong. And it was wrong because it was going against
But even Eve
God.
knew of something being wrong, in the sense that she knew God had said not to do something.
Right, but she was deceived into thinking that maybe
it was
she
worth the trade-off.
or
Right.
maybe she was taking a risk.
Yeah, I mean, some way. But I'm just saying, I'm not saying that Eve wasn't deceived. My point is that there was some inkling in her that it wasn't like, can you eat of that? I don't know.
The implication, though, is that good and evil in the context of the tree is not exactly the same thing as right and wrong in the context of our morality or sin.
So next question would be: do either of you think any of us have the knowledge of good and evil that it speaks about?
I think everybody does.
Yes. I think both of them got it, and everybody got it from them from then on.
Yeah.
Okay. You got to have context, but for example, it would be good for you to become a doctor, but if you don't become one, it wouldn't be evil or an ideal setting.
Now, that's a simplistic idea of values. Good in a simplistic sense of better than something else. That's not what it's talking about. Knowledge of good and evil is much more, it's like a philosophical bent. It's much more substantive. We're talking about something bigger.
The way I would tentatively explain the knowledge of good and evil is, and I've thought about this a lot, and it's not a good explanation, but it's the best one I can come up with for myself so far. And that is that the knowledge of good and evil is the incapacity to unknow something. That's how I would phrase it. And
interesting. Like you open a door and you can't close it again.
yeah, see, because
once you've seen it, you never get that out of your
It's like
mind.
they it's like evolution. It's going back to, I listened to them, and I was listening to them, and they said something that kind of made me think this. And they're like, they were criticizing the Bible because the Bible doesn't give us guidance, for instance, on enriching uranium, and so therefore they're relegating it, whatever. But what they say is, they're like, it would be very helpful for us to know that isn't something we should know. And it's like, you don't understand, that's not possible for humanity. We are not able to say, we shouldn't know that, so let's just not know that. We just can't. It's like, once we know it, that's it. It's not.
And how can you know that you shouldn't know that until you know it?
Right. And once you know it, you can't then unknow it. We are not capable of doing that. And once we know how to enrich uranium, we're gonna take it all the way until we make the biggest possible bomb we could ever make. There's just no way to undo that. It's just any door we open, we're gonna go through. And there's no way humanity can look at something and say, that door should never be opened, and everyone will be like, yeah, that's a good idea. Let's never open that door. It's like as soon as we know the door's there, that's it. We're going through.
Well, they tried though. Like they tried to stop cloning based on moral grounds, cloning of humans.
Oh, they can try, but
somebody's always going to buck the.
yeah.
And I'm curious.
Well, yeah. And yet there seems to be in God a capacity.
Did you ever see that movie Multiplicity?
Yeah.
You know, make a couple copies of myself. I'm sorry.
The problem is I would end up being the dumb one. All the others would be the smart ones.
My first copy would be the dumb one.
You want to move your chair. You keep moving closer to me.
I like you. I'm magnetically attracted. Look, if I do this, it'll keep me over there. Yeah. That's kind of how. Well, okay. That's kind of how that gets me every time.
Yeah.
That thing when it
Oh,
fills
you're
up
hearing
when
something?
it hits 4 gig, it has to start a new file and it beeps.
Oh, I didn't hear that.
And every time it gets me, and I know it's going to do it, and I still. Well, no, you don't have the earphones on.
Oh, that comes through the
It
earphones.
comes through the earphones. I have to wear the earphones because if not, I start yelling. I'm not meaning to yell. Yeah, I raise my voice up, I end up all hoarse. It's crazy. I have no modulation if I can't hear myself.
I raise my voice when I'm out in public, even though I've got a loudspeaker. I don't know why.
Well, it's because you don't have a monitor. You got to get a
I don't
little
think
speaker.
that's it.
It will. It'll change. I know, because when I do classes with a loudspeaker, if I don't have a speaker pointed at me, a monitor, I'll yell.
Okay.
But if I have a monitor, you hear and it's real loud, and so you naturally. It's like these. I'll speak at a natural tone if I'm wearing these, but if I'm not, I'm preaching at them and it's just horrible.
But am I raising my voice?
I mean, I keep turning it down a little bit as you speak. Yeah, I would
You're
say
modulating
you are.
right there.
Yeah. Whenever you're speaking, I reach over and turn it down a little bit because you're a little loud.
I know that when I speak, like when I preach, I have to have auto gain. I have to have it automatically modulated because I go loud and I go soft and I go loud and soft. And
I bought some in-ear monitors, like singers wear, that are wireless, and I wear those when I preach.
Really?
Yeah, I'm starting to do that because if not, I go hoarse. The main problem is I go hoarse, and that's we're not amplifying the preaching because we're in a little room. It's not necessary, but I'll just shout until I'm just out of voice, and there's no read for it. If I put those monitors in and I put a little bit of volume there,
Have you checked your hearing?
I have good hearing. I can hear people. It's just it's bad habit, and it's real hard to break. It's easier for me just to put a monitor in, and then I don't have to work at breaking the habit. I should break the habit, but there's so many other things I want to do.
I'm going to spend too much time on that one.
So I just stick them in.
Very illogical to spend time on that one when you got some real failings.
Yeah,
You got some flaws that you really need to work on.
Exactly. Yeah, but that's how I stand. Is that what all the questions we had?
Yes. For now.
So then, how does the knowledge of good
So
and
who's
evil?
asking questions?
So you have Jason Angulo, Stephen Kincaid, and Brando Elliott.
Oh, they were asking questions. Okay.
Yeah, they can come on the live chat and ask questions, and then he decides whether to read them or not.
Yes.
Anyway, sorry. to interrupt you.
No, that's fine. So then, how does the knowledge of good and evil relate to sin itself? Is it just how do you think that ties in?
I don't know about the knowledge of good and evil. If that's a physical thing like speculation, it has to do with sexuality because they saw they were naked. If that has to do with that, then it's because sinfulness has to do. Remember, sinfulness has to do with three. I don't want to say themes. Three aspects of reality, and that's flesh, earth, or matter, and
Spirit, or what? What was the other?
yeah, what was the other one?
You said world the first.
World,
time.
the world. It's the flesh, the earth, and the world.
And so what is the world? 'Cause I've always had questions on that.
Is basically humanism. It's humanity. It's the idea that humanity is the highest. It's the ultimate. It's a self-centered view of humanity. It's basically humanism. The world is. It's not matter. It's not like materialism, and it's not like the flesh. Because our flesh, it's very clear. We know what our appetites are. We know what our desires are, and we know that we can abuse them, and we know that that's sin. Every culture knows this. And matter, it's materialism as opposed to heavenly, is is pretty clear also. Most cultures and most religions and even atheists know that you can be so materialistic that you forget what's really important in life. You can work so hard that you ignore your children, say, and even atheists know they shouldn't do that. And so, and yet the world has to do with the aspirations of humanity. And the idea is that we are the ultimate, and our happiness is that's why this modern gospel that focuses on humans' happiness is so destructive to what sinfulness is because it's elevating humanity up to humanity is the ultimate goal, even of God, that God's goal is to make us happy or to make us fulfilled or something. And that's the wrong emphasis. That's in fact sinfulness. So sinfulness is how we abuse the flesh, how we abuse the earth. And I'm not talking about climate change. I'm talking about materialism, how we think, like scientifically thinking that scientific knowledge about our earth and about matter and about astrophysics and stuff like that is valuable when compared, say, to knowledge about how to break addiction or, how to create a good marriage or something like that, which is way more valuable. And so that focus, that obsession with materialism is also sin. And that would include possessions and getting a lot of money and all these kind of things that are sinfulness because of its earthly nature, materialism. And then, of course, the humanity aspect of it is the world. And that's how the Bible describes it. It says the lust of the eyes. There's the lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. And that is that our idea that our life is what's important. And people all over the world are trying to live in such a way, or what they want is the best possible life. And they're completely overlooking the fact of death. In fact, they're even willing, like Jeremiah says, they've made a covenant with death. They just say, you leave me alone and I'll leave you alone. We're going to have a really good life, whatever. And then we die. It's totally nonsensical. Death makes meaningless nonsense out of everything in this life. It's completely meaningless. And yet people are still trying to find meaning in this life. That's the delusion of the world. And all of those things are what sinfulness is associated with. Beyond that, I don't know. Maybe there's something else. But those three are biblical, and I can also very, very clearly see them. That's what our sinfulness is. And that's why it's so foolish to think about us overcoming sin in this life. Because, it's just not possible. It's not everything. It's like I was watching television, and I watch these commercials, and every time I think, that's just not true. That's not. It's a lie. It's a falseness. There's a sinfulness in a very well slickly done marketing technique where they don't give certain information and they press only the positive, and there's something sinful even about that. And yet from their standpoint, no, it's not sinful. There's nothing wrong with it. And even good Christians would say there's nothing wrong with it. But from my standpoint, that is the wrong focus. It's the wrong obsession. And that's why all of these obsessions that people have prove their sinfulness. But the law comes in so that they can see their sinfulness. But God sees it all the time. There's no avoiding our sinfulness. It permeates every aspect of our being. Mm-hmm. That's why Jesus could say, you do really good things to your children, but you're still evil. Because it's not about what you do. It's about what you are, who you are, deep down inside. Right. Now, how that affects, what was God expecting from the start? What was he expecting? Was he expecting Adam and Eve to get past the temptations and then maybe some of their great grandchildren fail or something, and then he'd do his work of redemption that way? I don't know what he was planning on doing. If there was a plan B, or if this is plan B, I don't know. I know we don't think of God in those terms because he says, I know everything from the beginning and all that. But even so, you talk about idiomatic thinking. That's God saying, I know everything. And, what is he trying to tell us by that? That he's got control or that it's all planned and he's got it figured out, or I don't know. But so much I can speculate so much by what's the way it happened. And I'm thinking, what was God planning? What was the other options? What were the other possibilities? And I do believe in options. I do believe that people have free will and that they have options. And I don't mean free will in the theological argument side of it. I mean free will in the sense that I make my own decisions.
Explain the difference for those that don't know. What do you mean by not in the theological?
There was an argument back about salvation by grace back in the days of Martin Luther and way before him, all the way back to Augustine at least, probably before him too. But it was an argument about whether people are so internally evil that, or they're not. Pelagius was the guy that said that people are not inherently evil, and so they don't need to be baptized as babies. And Augustine was saying, no, they are inherently evil, so they do need to be baptized as babies. And of course, the Bible never says baptized by babies, so that's Pelagius' argument. And Augustine's saying, yeah, but they had circumcision, and that's his argument. And so, but then Martin Luther sides with Augustine and says people are completely evil. They cannot please God in the flesh because they're, doesn't mean they're as evil as they can be. It just means that, but I'm digressing. Anyway, he wrote a book called Bondage of the Will. And no, it's the opposite way. Erasmus, he had written books about it, and Erasmus wrote a book called Free Will. And Martin Luther responded to that book, Free Will by Erasmus, with his book Bondage of the Will. Since then, the battle lines are drawn, and people who believe in salvation by faith and works will say that we have free will theologically, and people who
meaning we have the capacity to do good.
We could live. We it's our choice. We are condemned because of our choice, not because of our parents' choice or anything. It's our choice, and that means that people can be saved by their own efforts, essentially, and people who believe in salvation by grace alone, faith alone, have taken Luther's side on the bondage of the will, meaning even our wills are depraved. Even our wills are tainted by sin. So that even when we do good things for our children, we're still evil. That's the idea. But that's not what I'm talking about when I say free will. I'm saying that we are morally responsible for our own decisions, and we had a choice. And so I do have a choice as to whether I'm going to sin or not. I do have a choice, and I am morally responsible for whatever my choice is. But that doesn't mean that I'm not influenced by my sinful nature. I'm influenced by my flesh, which is a sinful nature. I'm influenced by the desire, say, for sex, or I'm influenced by the desire for the stuff that you have that I don't have. These things are in my flesh. They're in my desires. But that doesn't mean that I don't have a choice. I do have a choice. And so I'm not sure that that's a valuable distinction.
But do you have a choice but not the capacity to act upon it? Or do you think humans have the ability to act upon the choices they have?
I'm not sure whether semantically that's...
Or do they just have the responsibility or the liability but not actually the power to act on it? Because, I mean, this is where the problem
is that the Bible says all have sinned. And that would indicate that we do not have the ultimate power to overcome our sin, to overcome our sinful appetite, which would go back to the original, what was God going to do? I mean, was God expecting Adam and Eve to overcome temptation without a sin nature, without a sinfulness inside?
I did a study recently on this actual subject, and including that because it ties into, I think, in my mind, it ties into the problem of evil, and how you resolve that. Which, have you done any teaching or anything that on the problem of evil?
What do you mean by the problem of evil?
So the philosophical and problem of evil. Why? How can you have a God who is all knowing, all powerful, and all good?
That's the idea of free will.
And then
everybody answers that by saying God made people with free will.
Right, but that only answers half of it, because you have the moral evil, which would be the free will side, which is the evil that is done. Right, evil and the problem of evil dilemmas is using the word evil in a very antiquated way. It's not referring to moral sin. The word evil includes it, but it's not what it's using evil in the sense of what would be the word? Can't think of the word that would be now more modern. It'd be the problem of suffering. So it includes sin, but it would include everything else that has nothing to do with sin directly. or maybe not even.
You mean
indirectly.
suffering at the hands of bad people, or just
suffering at all?
no? See, I don't think of suffering in the sense of evil, because I think of suffering as the conflict, and conflict is what makes life interesting. Everything has to have a conflict, and God was not going to create a world with no conflict. There was going to be conflict in the world, whether we sinned or not. I just can't.
When you say there's going to be conflict, let's say nobody sinned. What kind of world would have conflict? What kind of conflict are we talking about?
Well, there's all kinds of
Earthquakes? You think people
that would be
die
part
from
of it. I
earthquakes?
think there would be. I think there would be. You could even have war over not things that are not determinable. Like right now, we have all kinds of questions that just there's no real answer to.
You think that if you think that let's hypothetically say Adam and Eve don't sin, nobody sins, there'd be war?
I believe that's possible. I believe it. I believe it'd be possible to have war.
Well, I don't know about that.
Well, it's about just even if it's not war like in killing each other, it could be war in another sense. It'd be like competition among businesses. You have conflict. You have competing interests. You have two men want the same woman.
Yeah, I don't know about that. That would be a hard one to I have to think about that. The problem I see there is it's like
But that's speculation, so it's
No.
really a waste of time to spend too much time thinking about
well,
that.
but then that leads you to it's not exactly true because that leads you to then what exactly is the world to come going to look like? Because I think most people would think that the world to come will be the world that should have been. It's some way in some parallel there that whatever Adam lost is going to be the world to come.
Well, I don't think so.
Whatever
Yeah,
Adam
unless
could have
you're
had.
not talking about the millennial reign. You're talking about
I'm talking about the new world.
the new earth, new heaven, new earth.
No, not the millennial reign. I'm talking about the new earth.
I'm sorry, but I'm just too speculative, and I just think that the world to come is going to be. I just have the tendency to speculate that it's going to be everything. It's going to be all the different potential worlds. I just look at the universe and I think it's just too big. It's too huge, and I don't think he created it just to get rid of it and start over. I really do think this is it. What he's done here, it's fantastic, and so God is going to be doing a lot of things. And if that's true, and it's pure speculation, but it's not speculation based on nothing. It's based on stuff that it says. So in my mind, there's going to be a lot of different. It's like Solomon stumpers. You know, we got all kinds of questions that we just don't really have answers to, and yet there's got to be a way to answer it. And I think God is doing these kinds of things in a sense like an experiment, and He's just putting things out there. And we are maybe just one experiment amongst many. And He's building a people that are special to Him. And we're going to have a role in whatever He's doing with this universe. Now, that is pure speculation, but Paul says things like, you know, there are things that are hidden that have not been told us, and I'm not even lawful to tell you. I can't tell you what I saw. And there's things that are hidden in the book of Revelation, and the book of Daniel, and the book of Ezekiel. And wow, in my mind, there's so much potential about what's coming. And I don't think it's going to be just black and white. It's not going to be simple. I think it's going to be extremely complex, and it's going to require people truly loyal to God to be able to handle it. And I think God has created Himself a people that will be, not right now, but will be completely loyal to Him. And that's what the church is, as His bride, as His very close companions. And so whatever that is in the future, I don't even think it's necessarily confined to just this earth. I think it's a new heavens and a new earth. And I will say to you, part of the idea of the flexibility of the first chapter of Genesis is what it means when God says, I'm creating the heaven and the earth. What the heaven includes. The heaven could just include the solar system, or it could include the galaxy, or it could include the whole universe. And most people now say, okay, it means the whole universe. He created light and all that stuff. And yet that's why I kind of mix all the theories together, sort of with the gap theory and the day-age theory and the punctuated day, separated day theory, and and this young Earth theory, I think all of them are partly true. I think all of them are pointing to the same thing, and that is that God is doing something here that's huge, and that the first chapter of Genesis is intentionally flexible to allow us to figure it out. So, I know that's not anything on topic, but
No, it's fine. We don't have topics. We just talk.
you guys have topics. Come on.
No, we really don't. We just sit around and find something interesting to talk about because that's what I
You
like
get
to
bored
listen to.
easily.
I try to talk about things I wish people were talking about that I could listen to at work. So, I go to work and I got a lot of time where I'm just doing things mechanically because most of what I do is extraordinarily simple. And it just has to be done over and over. Like I'm working at a dorm in Houston for the University of Houston, and we're putting towel bars, 4 screws into blocking, same place, every room, thousands and thousands of them. And you're just doing it over and over and over. So you don't have, we have a laser on a stand that shoots the line. You don't have to measure. You just hold it up there and screw it on. And you're just doing it all day long. And so a lot of time to listen to something. And so I wish there were things.
Better stuff to listen to.
Yeah, I don't want to listen to sermons necessarily all the time. I want to listen to because sermons are great, and yet the problem with a sermon is there's no pushback, right? So the preacher says something, and it's not the time or the place to say, well, wait a minute, explain that, or I don't agree with that, or what about this? There's no pushback. And only sermons is extraordinarily boring after a while. And no matter how good the preaching is. There's some really great preachers that I love to listen to, but I can't listen to them all the time. But if they were talking to somebody about something I'm interested in, well, that would be great. But the only thing I can find that they're talking about anything that's not just trivial are these evolutionary biologist types. They're the only ones I can find that are not talking about trivial stuff that's interesting to hear, even though I don't agree with what they're saying. It's like, I don't agree with what they're saying, but they're at least trying to have an intellectual conversation as opposed to talking about popular culture and what celebrity is dating who, and it just, oh, good grief, that's horrible. And I just find that there's not enough Christians that are providing this type of content.
So how do these evolutionary, I hate the word, evolutionary biologists, because there's no explanation there, but how do they explain morality I know they believe that morality exists because you just can't hardly deny it. It's everywhere.
That's a real tough question for them, and they have different ways. It's mainly viewed through a utilitarian lens. And
Well, it has to be because that's natural selection. That's utilitarian.
right. Exactly. But yeah, that's a really tough
But they
one for
know
them.
that there is such a morality, a real morality in our minds. They know that it's beyond utilitarianism. They say that rape is wrong, but rape is very utilitarian.
See, that's very interesting. Like that video that I sent you, that link, where they talk about, the different ways that humans can procreate, and they won't even talk about rape as being one because it's so horrible. And they say, it's just so unimaginably
But it's one
horrible.
of the biggest. It's like they say Genghis Khan. He just took all these women and impregnated them and let them go, or whatever. I'm not sure how he did it, but that his DNA is in a certain large percentage of the human population right now.
No, yeah, but
Or the Vikings. How many of the northern Europeans have Viking DNA in them because they
pillaged and raped.
they would rape and leave. They wouldn't kill them. They'd just rape them and leave them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so, it's obvious that if you're going to have a serious discussion on procreation, as far as from a very clinical perspective, a very biological perspective, well, you can't ignore rape, and yet they don't like to talk about it whatsoever because it's horrible.
I can imagine they have nothing to say because that would be very utilitarian. In fact, if you're deriving your morality from natural selection, that would be the ultimate good.
Now, here's what's interesting. So I was listening to them. Again, it was Brett Weinstein. I really like listening to him. He's a more moderate voice in all of this. So I really enjoy listening to him and what he has to say.
He's the one. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. But he's the one that no, is that Jordan Peterson? One of them treats religion as a good thing, even
That's
though it's not
Jordan.
true.
Okay, no, that's Brett. Well, that's both of them. So Brett Weinstein, you're probably thinking about Brett Weinstein, though, because Jordan's a little more towards the religion side. He believes it to be archetypically true. So Brett Weinstein's view of religion is that it is a useful fiction.
Right. I heard that. That's what I heard.
Yeah, that's Brett Weinstein's
Brando
view.
had showed me that. Yeah.
And he rejects, and that's his opposition to Sam Harris. So Sam Harris is with the New Atheist movement, or Dawkins. He's one they call the Four Horsemen or whatever. The Dawkins.
Yeah, I know Sam Harris.
Okay,
I haven't really heard him, but I know
well,
who
Sam
he is.
Harris is evolution is a mind virus, even though that's Dawkins' term.
You mean religion?
I'm sorry, religion is a mind virus. I think evolution's
Evolution's a mind virus. It's a mass delusion, is what it is. It's a huge hoax.
Yeah. Yeah. He believes that evolution is, religion, Sam Harris believes religion is horrible and terrible.
But
and the source of evil.
Weinstein thinks that it is evolutionarily useful.
Yes. And evolutionarily explained. In other words, he says you can't believe in evolution and not believe in religion because it obviously came from evolution, because everything comes from evolution and it's here. Therefore, ergo, it came from evolution, and we can't appreciate things that come from evolution and not appreciate religion, even if what it says is untrue. That's his view. Now, Jordan Peterson's even more to the whatever side you would call it, right, I guess, of that, and believes that there is tremendous truths in religion that are archetypically preserved in religion, human truths that go back, and that God or the deity is, I don't know, he's not real clear on it, but it's, I guess he would say it's the best part of all of us or something. I don't know. That's kind of where they fall in that spectrum. But anyways, Brett Weinstein I was listening to him the other day, and he said he had a debate with Dawkins. Weinstein and Dawkins had a debate, and he was pressing Dawkins for getting sidetracked into this anti-religion thing. He was going after him, saying, you're the preeminent evolutionary biologist. We need you to be studying evolution, and you're over here, trying to trounce Christianity or religion, and it's a waste of everyone's time. You're wasting your knowledge that you should be imparting to us.
Because you're going extinct. Because all these all these atheist types, they don't have kids. So what's the point? Evolution is selecting them out.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, he's doing that, and he's saying, we need to start investigating how evolution speaks to morality and speaks to human interaction and speaks to humanity.
But it ultimately denies morality.
Well, that's Dawkins. Dawkins says, I find it appalling to think of evolution in any connection to humanity. That all it results from that is death, genocide. Well,
you mean religion?
No.
He thinks of evolution?
Yes. He does not want Dawkins does not want evolution studied in connection to human interaction or
Well, he's absolutely right. If he says that, I didn't know he had that kind of insight.
Yeah,
because I've talked to atheists who are praising evolution as if religion is the cause of all the damage, and I had to inform them that evolution is connected to Marxism and fascism and all these modern isms that have killed more people than all religious wars combined.
That's
in 1 century.
Yeah. That's Weinstein is telling him, no, we need to, evolution is this amazing tool we have, and we need to be now applying this to human psychology, everything. He wants to actually examine, kind of like the video I sent you. They want to examine all human interaction through an evolutionary lens, and Dawkins is like having none of that. He won't have that. He's like,
I'm surprised by that. Yeah.
I was too. And so was Brett Weinstein. Yeah. They have a public. You can look
that might be new on Dawkins, because I haven't read Dawkins in a long time, but I did read.
No,
Dawkins
I'm not saying that
time.
Dawkins is saying that religion isn't equally bad. He's not saying religion's good, evolution. That's not his point. His point is that evolution is a very, and I'm putting words in his mouth. Okay, you'd have to go look. This is a public debate. It's on YouTube. The Weinstein-Dawkins debate. They debated. It's quite long, like 2-hour debate. Anyways, and then there's another follow-up, the one I was listening to originally, because I went and listened to the debate afterwards, but where Weinstein comments on that, and he really clarifies what Dawkins' position is and why it was so shocking to him that Dawkins would have that position on evolution. Because he has this...
I'd have to compare.
He'd have this... Yeah, you go look
That's not what I remember Dawkins treating. Evolution to Dawkins is... it's so completely gene-centered evolution in the sense that...
But it's brutal. That's his point, and that he doesn't believe. He believes that humanity, and again, I'm putting words in his mouth. This isn't text. This isn't verbatim. But Dawkins basically believes that humanity has to learn to co-inhabit or coexist on not evolutionary terms, because evolutionary terms are brutal.
So we stop evolving.
Well, that's Weinstein's criticism of the position, is that he's essentially throwing away this, what he considers to be this greatest tool mankind has ever come up with for understanding the world. We're going to throw it away because it's been so misused. And Weinstein agrees it's been terribly misused, but, and this is the case with all these idealists, but we are going to use it better. Everyone else has killed 100 million people with it, but we're not going to do that. We're gonna build a society of love and tolerance with it.
Yeah, that's not going to happen.
No, I don't think so either.
No, no, I don't know. I don't know about that. In my mind, evolution is so. I mean, the big picture evolution is so evil. It's such a rejection of God, such a rejection of human responsibility, such a rejection of good and evil, such a rejection of morality. It is undermining morality as we speak right now in the schools, everywhere. Just the general perception of philosophical evolution, and natural selection as considered as the thing that got us to where we are, treating that as if it's the good thing when the Bible clearly makes that the bad thing. The Bible equates that with the flesh, which is sinful. And so natural selection is the anti-moral, and our spiritual understanding and our basic recognition of the value of other humans. That's not the evolutionary. That's not the natural selection side of it. That's the spiritual side of it. So everything in reality, the good points us away from natural selection. We would reject the principles of natural selection if we're trying to establish what morality is, trying to reach God. Because once God has made us, then natural selection keeps us by our baser instincts to a certain necessary procreation paradigm. It's the way it works. But then God is trying to get us to go beyond that and get up higher and think higher. And that's why we have the mind. That's why we have the spirit. It's something deeper. And it's only when we reject that higher that we go back down to the baser and become sinful. And that's our sinfulness. That's how sinfulness is understood. It's all our baser side of things. It's the natural selection side of things. That's base sinfulness.
It's what Paul. I think it's what Paul calls. Well, in English it says the natural man. In Spanish they translated it the animal man.
Animal man.
Which I really like that translation in Spanish.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah, he calls it the animal man. Yeah.
But natural man also works because natural man, because that's what they're talking about, nature. And if we're talking about nature, like the laws of nature, not talking about the spiritual nature that's in us, but the laws of nature, the laws of natural selection, the laws of procreation, the propagation of the species, the protection of the species, multiplication, be fruitful and multiply. All of these things have to do with natural selection and nature, natural processes, natural laws. And yet the Bible clearly associates that with sinfulness. So never was natural selection anything greater than our base nature. And we know as humans that we have a higher nature because God made us different than animals. If he had not said that, well, then we would assume we're just another animal, and so natural selection would be our highest goal. Procreate, have as many kids as possible. But even atheists know that's not the case because they know the mind is so much greater than natural selection that they're willing to forego having children to study these deep subjects. And this is what they're doing. They're choosing not to have children. So they don't even believe that natural selection is the basis for morality.
Yeah, that's right. Although they're trying to get it there. Some of them are. Some of them are trying to figure
because
out how
they're
to make
deluded.
It work. Yeah.
They cannot see. They just cannot see how foolish they're being. That's why the Bible talks about these intellectuals being so foolish. And it does all the time. The Bible, dozens of times, it makes the point that intellectual pursuit leads you off of a cliff. It makes you're overlooking, what does it say? He taketh the wise in their own craftiness and be not wise in their own conceits. Or he says, mind not high things, but condescend to men of low estate. And why? Because this concept of becoming intellectual and being intellectual and trying to be like these intellectuals, when Christians do that, they lose something. And I'm not against people thinking, becoming scientists or being scientific minded. Even I think we ought to apply scientific thinking to our understanding of the Bible or to our way of raising children. Or there ought to be some connection to. I consider science to be, and this is founded way back, science all the way from Aristotle on. The word science has been around a long time.
Yes.
And so it's knowledge derived from rigorous observation. And that's contradistinct to deduction or reason. It's observation, just like the argument between, I think it was Francis Bacon and Pascal, and one of them exalted reason, the way you can deduct, and the other one says, no, you got to just get back to simplicity of observation and be rigorous in your observation and you'll get more knowledge. And it turns out Bacon was right. Mm-hmm. Rigorous observation is what science is, and you can apply rigorous observation to any field. And I think you ought to. So I'm not against Christians delving into science as long as they understand that, but the idea of becoming intellectual, the idea of trying to try to achieve something by the intellectual pursuit, it's a false, it does lead you off a cliff. And that's what
It can.
Yeah, I'm just saying the Bible mentions it many, many times.
No, I know, but I wouldn't say that it's. I would
says
just.
The fool
I'm with you up to the point to where
the fool is wiser in his own mind or his own conceit than 7 men that can render a reason. Because you can get so smart that you set aside. Maybe it's common sense you're setting aside, but something about it you wind up denying.
My
God.
point is that I think you're right, and I think I'm with you all the way up to where I would moderate the last point, saying that it can lead you off a cliff, and it's led many, perhaps most, off a cliff, but it doesn't have to. It's not the inevitable end, because there's people who I think are incredibly pursued intellectualism to an incredible degree that are admirable Christians, like James Tour or John Lennox.
James Tour though, but he would deny the flood.
Maybe.
Oh yeah, because you can't have.
It depends what you mean by the flood. You mean a worldwide flood?
The flood, as it's described in Genesis 6 through.
Have you read John
9.
Lennox's book on these issues?
Only thing I know about John Lennox is I believe he debated Dawkins.
Yes, he did.
And I thought he held his own pretty good.
Oh yeah, he's great.
But
I like John Lennox.
But no, I know their type. I know where they're coming from. They're like Hugh Ross and all them. They have to fudge on. Now look, I believe that they can fudge on Genesis chapter 1. I believe it's got language that allows you to. In fact, some of the language led me to consider evolution in Genesis 1. I mean, it says, "Let the earth bring forth." That's evolutionary speak. That's like, why would God say it that way? Well, let the earth bring forth. Let the waters bring forth. And so I did. I rejected evolution not because of the Bible, but because it's just nonsense. It's not true. Evolution is just simply not true. But I can see some flexibility in chapter 1, much less flexibility in chapter 2 if you're going to believe it. If you want to say it's a myth or it's a legend or it's a allegory, okay, but in my mind you're just not believing it, and that's fine. You don't have to believe it. But when you get to chapter 6 and on, where it's talking about the flood, and of course by the time you get to Abraham and on, there's no more thinking of it as allegory. You either believe it or you don't. Either there was a person named Abraham, or you just don't believe the Bible.
You realize that, I haven't heard James Tour comment on Genesis 1 myself, so I can't speak.
I haven't either. I've heard some of his TED Talks.
I have only heard him speak on origin of life research, which he just takes him to task on.
Yes, that's true. He's proven that. It's clear. Yeah.
And he's really, really strong. And he's coming at it from a completely scientific viewpoint. He's not coming at it from a biblical viewpoint. So it's not that he's saying, well, this is against the Bible, or I'm a Christian. This is, I've looked at I'm a chemist right? I'm a PhD chemist, and I've looked at your stuff, and you're not proving what you say you're proving. And he just takes him to task on it.
Well, he's not the only one. That same exact argument's been going on
Yes.
for 200 years, since Lamarck.
And so that's what, I have on. That's what I mainly listen to, have heard him on. And then his testimony. I don't know if you've heard him basically give his testimony and speak to
I can't
in
remember
colleges. He's very, very.
I know who you're talking about, and
Yeah.
I've heard some of his talks.
So in like colleges, whenever he speaks, he's very.
I have
very
a problem
bold
with any
this.
of these intellectual Christians in that they are way too ready to toss out things like the flood, what the flood says. I don't know about Lennox. I don't know what he stands on, but I know their type, and I know that they are too flexible in being willing to say that these things, like Hugh Ross.
I do not know Hugh Ross, so I can't speak to him.
You don't know Hugh Ross? Mm-mm. Oh, he's one of the original intelligent design crowd where, except all scientific premises, they're all true, but God ultimately did it. He's very smart. I like Hugh Ross, but they deny the flood, and they're all of a piece. They're all of the same mindset, and that's the idea that we have to take Genesis 1 flexibly because we believe in that the speed of light proves whatever, and I'm not sure that it does. I'm not sure that we have to take it that flexibly because I think there are ways of understanding Genesis 1. I mean, allegorically, it's flexible. Genesis 1 is flexible. I can see it. But from then on, you're basically just denying it. You're saying, no, I know what it says, but I don't believe that. And I just can't go there. I can't.
Right.
I can't pretend that they are apologists for Christianity if they're denying the person of Noah and the actual destruction of this globe. In fact, I see that not just biblically. I see that in the explanation of geography, geology. You go to the Grand Canyon. That canyon did not get dug by that little river, and they've got several proofs of that. Any of the creationists can prove that it didn't happen. And then you've got, like, say, the petrified forest, hundreds and hundreds of square miles of huge trees buried under sediment and petrified without bacterial decay. That had to be a flood. And yet you look at the explanations that they give, and they say it was a meandering river and the trees fell over and they gradually became petrified. This is the stupidest thing in the world. It can't be. And so if that flood happened and all the cadavers in the rocks, the idea that they won't consider the possibility of a worldwide flood, and once they do, of course, then they lose their standing in the scientific community. And in my mind, that's a huge argument against them as apologists for Christianity.
So with John Lennox, I'm not sure where. I have to look and see what he says if he talks on the flood. But his basic, and he wrote a book on his perspective or his viewpoint of Genesis and how he approaches it.
Genesis 1.
Just Genesis as a whole. There's the creation, the whole from Genesis 1 on, just how he views that and why he thinks that Christians ought to be moderate.
Did he cover things like Adam and Eve and
He doesn't
Cain
deal
and
with
Abel?
He doesn't deal with anything specifically. It's about his perspective, how he looks at it. His book called 7 Days That Divide the World. That's the name of the book.
I haven't read it.
So it's about his perspective on how he approaches Genesis. Anyways, but basically, what I think sums up his viewpoint specifically. I'm not speaking to anyone else, but I think, if I understand it right, that he wants to be sure that he is not making a interpretation that he would equate with when Christians used to argue that the earth didn't move because the scriptures talk about the earth being firm on its basis. And there was time when Christianity and science all believed the earth stood still and everything revolved around it.
And you do realize that it was Christians that broke that mold.
Yes.
It wasn't.
But then it was also Christians.
It wasn't atheists that broke that mold.
I agree.
They were real Christians.
But it was also Christians who kept on holding on to the view for a long time.
Sure, but the point is
science.
what they say is that it was scientists that broke the mold.
That's not what John Lennox is saying. John Lennox is saying
everybody else says that.
Okay.
Like they'll say Galileo. Galileo was the scientist and the Holy Office was the religious. And Galileo was a Christian and the Holy Office was a real, not a very popular part of Christianity. I mean, it was an aberration. So those are not real stories that accurately depict the warfare between Christianity and science. That's not true. The true scientists were Christians. Copernicus was a Christian, and Kepler was a Christian, and Maxwell was a Christian, and Priestley was a Christian, and all of these tremendous scientists that did real scientific work, they were all Christians.
Yes. And yet there were many Christians who resisted, especially in the ones who weren't scientists.
Oh yeah, that's true.
And his point is that we need to be careful that we're not interpreting scriptures in a way that eventually we find out, oh, wait a minute, maybe we're interpreting them wrong, like interpreting that the earth doesn't move, and we think, well, okay, well, maybe you
so
can believe
how does that
this.
work, though, with the flood?
Like I said, he doesn't speak to the flood in detail. His point, he's not even saying that one thing, that his point in the book isn't what any of these verses mean. His point in the book is that we need to be cautious that we're not supplanting our interpretation for what we think is a literal taking of the Bible. We turn out to be wrong. So we need to look
There's
at this
another side to
cautiously.
that, though, and that is we ought to be cautious not to give too much credit to people who doubt what the Bible actually says, because we find it all the time where the Bible turns out to be right. Like for example, the Bible says several times that there's water under the earth. And the flood says the great fountains of the deep were broken up, and water apparently came out from under the earth. And everybody mocks that. And I even mocked it, the great hydroplate theory, that there was a big plate of water underneath the ground. And there's a few verses in the Bible that say that. And, you wonder, well, maybe we're misunderstanding those verses or whatever. And then it turns out they have found it. There is a huge reservoir of water, 250 miles straight down, and it's right now, and they found evidence of it, and they can even prove it seismologically. They have it now proved. So, but nobody goes back and says, oh, we were wrong. The Bible was right all along. The Bible does never get credit for having said something that if you were just so obtuse towards science that you just said, well, no, the Bible says there's water under the earth. I believe it. That settles it. You would have wound up being right. And Christians give up too quick. And they say, well,
I think
how could that many animals fit on a boat that small? I went to college, and they said that.
yes. Well, no, I agree. I have no defense. I make no defense, and my intention is not to defend anything that critics or skeptics are saying. But I do have a problem with positions that Christianity takes that I think they're a little too far out there,
Like
a little
what?
too far extreme. So I think that it's a mistake to take any part of the Bible as being scientific literature.
Well, how about just being correct?
I think the Bible is absolutely correct. I don't have any problem with that. But you can be correct in different ways.
Okay, so if the Bible says all the highest mountains were covered with water, is that correct, or is it not scientific? And so what does that mean if it's not scientific?
Well, I don't know what it would mean. I believe that's actually correct. And I believe in the flood the way it describes. And I think that's a historical account
Okay,
of the
but
flood.
are we taking that scientifically?
Well, I don't know. It depends what we're calling science, right?
Well, okay. Is
But
a
what I'm
mountain something else
But
if it's scientifically speaking?
No. So, but here's what I'm trying to say. If we look at, like, say, Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 and Genesis 3 or any other place, it doesn't have to be Genesis, it can be anywhere. And you have, let me give you an example. Let me give you an example that may be a little less controversial. So Paul says that the Corinthians were sick because they took the Lord's Supper unworthily. Okay. Is that a scientific
No.
thing? But it was not, but it's true. I believe they were actually sick. And I believe they were sick because they took the Lord's Supper unworthily. But I think they were also sick because of some natural illness they had. And that a
Well,
doctor...
but you don't know that. You just assume.
I said I think. I didn't say I know. I think this. I think that they had a natural illness. In other words, they were actually sick in their bodies, which would be natural.
Right.
And that if a doctor, hypothetically, could look at them and say, well, you have this problem. This is your illness. He wouldn't say you're sick because you took the Lord's Supper unworthily. Medicine would not have an answer to that. And nor do I think that hypothetically a doctor would look at it and say, well, you're sick from something that's not natural. You're naturally fine, but you're supernaturally sick. So you would have
Right.
a case in there
But how
where
does
you
that
have
apply to the flood?
I'm not applying to flood, like I said. So my point is, my point isn't the flood.
No. You have to apply it to what we're talking about, because you said
What I said
I don't
was-
like the way Christians.
I don't like the way Christianity tends to want to make everything in the Bible scientific. I don't think the Bible's scientific literature.
Okay, but so my point is, you have a description of a worldwide flood in Genesis 6-9.
Okay.
And you say, well, Christians can take the Bible too scientifically, and it's not really talking scientifically. How would you then make the same parallel between the Christians that get sick, and yet it's because of a spiritual reason, because they were sinning and God made them sick? And then okay, we could say God says, I'm going to destroy the earth because they're sinful. And that's the theological side of it. God's destroying the earth because they're sinful. But he actually did. Those people really were sick. And so if he did destroy the earth, all the people on the earth, and he covered all the high mountains, and I don't know how that makes any difference to say we're saying scientifically or not.
First of all, I'm not saying that every detail in the Bible is going to change by looking at it one way or another. But let's look at the case of the flood and the elements that would be impacted by this. It's like the rainbow. God says, I'm going to put a bow in the thing. This is what the bow is. This is why it's there. Well, if you look at it scientifically, none of that is quote unquote accurate.
No, scientifically there was a bow in the sky.
What I'm saying is, it doesn't. Science will tell you there's a bow in the sky because light is going through water droplets and it's causing a prismatic effect. That would be the scientific view. We look at it and say, yes, that's fine. That's not the point. And was there a rainbow before? Were there waterfalls in the garden? And if the light went through it, did God create the prismatic effect at that moment? Well, I don't think the Bible's speaking to that, is what I'm saying. When I say that we take...
Okay, but
I
what
don't
the
look at
Bible
it,
does speak to, whether you take it scientifically or not, I don't know where you're going with that. But to say somebody like John Lennox or Hugh Ross, or I don't know about James Tour, what he thinks, but those folks or the whole intelligent design crowd, if they really do ridicule in their minds, and I don't know that they're being ugly in their speaking, but I know Hugh Ross sometimes is a little bit stiff on people who take it literally. But when it says all the mountains were covered with water and everything on earth that had the breath of life died, when it says that, how in the world how in the world does this example of saying Christians shouldn't take it that way?
No, I'm not saying they shouldn't take it that way. And I don't know that John Lennox
says
says
they take
that
it
either.
too scientifically.
I said they take the Bible as being scientific, written as scientific literature, which I think is a mistake.
How does that affect the flood?
It may
issue?
not affect the flood. It may not affect 90% of the Bible, whatever it affects.
But I thought
think
you were
it's a mistake.
defending John Lennox by saying
No, I said
Christianity takes the Bible too scientifically. And that was John Lennox's
John Lennox is saying
argument,
Christians, right, and not
that the
against
Bible is
flood.
not scientific literature.
That's
and
an accurate
what that
statement.
is, well, I disagree.
Okay.
It can be very scientific. It can be rigorous observation. Simply put,
But you understand
pay
that's not
attention.
what-
Somebody saw the flood and they wrote down what happened. That's rigorous data collection.
That's fine. And if we want to use a historical definition for what science is, and then we'll put all their comments into that historical context, then they would agree probably with what you're saying. But they're putting it in a modern context of what they see, what science is, and that's not what science is today, which is fine. I don't care what it is. I'm not arguing for science.
I don't think there's any difference. I think if John Lennox says the Bible's not speaking scientifically, what does he mean? You can't put it in a test tube?
No, he's saying that science has a particular way of doing it. So to not put words in anyone else's mouth, I'll tell you how I define science in this discussion, or how I look at the Bible when I say it's not scientific. And that is, the Bible has not given us natural causes for natural occurrences. That's not its purpose. I'm not saying it never does that. I'm saying that's not the purpose of the Bible. So when it tells me where the rainbow came from and what it's for, it's 100% true, but it's not the natural explanation for that natural occurrence.
But is there?
It is the theological
You also agree that
explanation.
there are some natural explanations for what happened.
Sure. And I think there are natural explanations for things that happen that aren't even in the Bible.
We're back to the square one. We have Christians like John Lennox.
Well, I
Hugh
don't think
Ross.
you should say that, because I don't think you know what he says.
No, I don't know what John Lennox
Okay.
says. I just know his group. I know
I don't
that
know.
mindset.
I've listened to him preach He's also
He
a
might be
preacher.
better. I don't really know.
I have never heard him say anything that, in my opinion, disparaged the Bible as being truth and literal truth. Just not necessarily scientific truth. But he's coming at it from the perspective I'm coming from, not yours.
He believes in the millions of years. The billions
I don't
of
know.
years.
He
Oh, you
doesn't
don't
really
know.
speak to that.
Okay, then forget John Lennox. You're talking about Christian.
He makes allowances. He's not going to make
I mentioned I
his
have
main
a problem
point in his
with
book.
Christians who accept scientific standards. In other words, they accept whatever science says now, and they fit the Bible into it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, right now, the theory is billions of years and gradual evolution, and whatever. So you get a Christian like Hugh Ross defending Christianity so that he can win scientists to the Lord. And yet, what he says is that you have to understand it was a local flood, and it just killed everybody that Noah knew, and it killed all the. And listen, you don't have to believe the Bible. I agree. A Christian can say, I don't believe the first 11 chapters of Genesis. They can say that if they want. And that's up to them. I don't think that's real Bible believing, but they don't have to believe it. But if you're claiming to believe the Bible, you can't toss out the story of the flood and still say you're believing the Bible. What kind of Christianity is it that says, well, I believe that Jesus died on the cross and rose again from the dead, but I don't believe that there was a flood?
I understand what you're saying, and it's a valid point. Here's the counterpoint to that, and that is that we can look back through history and find Christians thinking they're believing what the Bible says, literally, and then come to find out they're not entirely right on what they thought the Bible said literally, and we've made adjustments.
Are you talking about pillars of the earth or something like that?
Whatever. I'm just saying that has happened, and I'm not. Again, I think you're misunderstanding where I'm coming from on this. Perhaps, maybe not. Maybe you're not. I think you are. I'm not coming at it defending any group of Christians who deny any part of the Bible to anybody's standard. But I do think for myself, I'm a bit cautious now in saying if you don't subscribe to this interpretation of these chapters, you don't believe the Bible.
Well, then you can't say anything. How about if a guy says, well, I believe in Jesus, I just don't believe he rose again from the dead. Can we say then, well, then you don't believe the Bible?
I would probably say yes to that one.
Right. So you can mark that all the way down, just.
No, surely you think there's a difference.
Where's the line you're going to draw and say, well, I don't believe Jesus was the Christ. I believe he rose again from the dead, but I don't believe he was the Christ. I believe that the Christ is a greater concept. And there are people who believe that of all things.
Sure.
And yet, no, if you don't believe he was the Christ, the Son of the living God, if you don't believe that, you do not believe the Bible. And then, of course, you get into the textual criticism arguments where people are saying they believe the Bible, but there's not one part of the Bible that they can say is accurate. Not one.
Well, that's a different discussion, which we ought to have another day. That would be very interesting, but we don't have near enough time to get into that
What
one. So
time
let's
is it?
stick with it. It's
I don't see
11:43.
We're about 2 hours
Oh,
and 40
wow.
minutes into
Yeah,
this.
no, this goes by
This
so
goes
fast.
fast.
Oh yeah, it's a blast. That's why I love doing this. I don't know that
It's a lot
anybody.
easier to talk than it is to listen.
Yeah, I don't know that anybody actually watches this. So
No, I know. I know Debbie watches it.
really,
Yeah.
oh, that's good because I don't know that anyone watches it. I just do
they
it because
might
it's
not
so
watch
much fun.
all 3 hours. Like I
Yeah.
will walk through and it's on. I'll see you guys on there, and I'll listen to a couple of statements or whatever, and I'll
And get mad and leave.
disgusted, and just walk out. Bunch of morons. Count me out. Run. No, but I watched the one with. I think I got a couple of maybe an hour worth of Stevens. What you did with Steven.
See, like one reason we do this for as long as we do, and we do it like I said, is because I like to listen to things when I'm working, and I don't like it to be short ones because it's a pain to find something. So I want to be able to put something on that's going to go for 3 or 4 hours, and I can just be listening to it. That isn't music, which gives me a headache, and preferably would be discussions of this sort. I don't even have to agree with any of it. I don't even care. It's not even the point. I just want to hear something.
It's like me
that is
going to work
interesting.
and I turn on talk radio.
Yeah,
Even I don't have to listen to it because I can block it out. But
Yeah.
then all of a sudden they'll say something that catches.
Yeah,
my
see, and I don't want to listen to politics either. I'm sick of that.
I agree.
And so that's why I do this, to give, hopefully, and I wish more people would. I wish more Christians, and I don't think everyone should. I'm not saying everyone, but I wish there were more people. I wish you would. and others would do things like this and put out content like that because it's so easy to do, and you'd be shocked at how
This
many
is
people.
easy?
Oh, I'm doing it.
Give
I'm
me a
doing it.
break.
I'm doing it my hard way, right? I do everything the hard
What
way.
I do is easy. My unapologetics,
I was going to ask you that. How do you film that, or does Stephen film that?
I do this. Click, turn it on, and I have it on a little thing in my office, and I talk.
Nice.
That's all I do. This is the whole thing. Now I do then transfer it over to my computer and edit it. Get rid of. I try to get it down to. My objective is 5 minutes, but I'm usually get it down to 7 minutes or whatever. But I know that I don't like to. I see a YouTube thing, and if it's more than 5 or 10 minutes, I just don't have time.
See,
I
there's
just
like two groups of people on it. So you have the ones that are like you that want to see a short video that's real concise, which is what I started trying to do. And I would actually script them and just do like kind of what you're doing, a little more elaborate, but basically.
Well, mine is not really to entertain Christians. I've got people at my work that I give them.
No, you're more like I said. You're more
and I'm just
gospel
giving them
oriented.
the gospel, and it's also the unapologetics thing in that I'm not giving them a compatible gospel. I'm trying to tell them what is the hardest thing for them to hear. I want to get the doctrines that are the hardest things for them to hear, and then I want to explain them the best I can. And so that means there's no apology. This is what God says. Either you believe it or don't.
Yeah.
And one of them I might say is either you believe there was a flood or you don't. And if you don't believe there was a flood, you just don't believe the Bible. Just let's be honest about it.
Right. So there's the people that are like that. They want to see short ones, and there's certainly a lot of need for that. That's why I was really glad when you were doing that content. You've kind of backed off some, I guess, in time, but I haven't seen any
I haven't
recent
been at work
videos.
in 2
Oh, you do it at work? Okay.
I do it right in my office.
Oh, okay, I got you. So, and then there's the other ones that are more like me that want long form content. They want a discussion that is going to go on, ramble around,
Yeah, but
and,
then you need
and
experts.
discuss it. Not necessarily. I don't have experts. I'm not one, certainly, and I don't have any to talk to. You're the closest thing to an expert I've gotten in here. Closest thing. But I was going to ask you about that also. Don't you think, or I don't know, I shouldn't say that because that sets you in the wrong position. Not probably how I should ask that. I think that Christianity, especially in small churches like ours, has a dearth of intellectual pursuit, in not only in what the world would consider acceptable, which would be sciences or whatever, but also in really analyzing and thinking through doctrine and being able to articulate it and to offer more than just statements on it.
I think people are so different that they have different strengths, and I think every single person thinks scientifically in some things, and every single person thinks emotionally in some other things, and we are so varied, so different, that every church is going to have its cliques, its groups. Like, for example, I can't stand mush. I'm just not interested in the warm fuzzies and the talking about,
Feelings
the
and-
comforts and the. I mean, I've read Amy Carmichael and I've read, Watchman Nee, and I don't know. I just, in my mind, that doesn't interest me. But that doesn't mean it's not wonderful. My wife loves to read Johnny Erickson, and I'm not interested in reading about suffering. There are different things, and so I don't think that the church is defaulting there. I think every church has its strengths and weaknesses, but I think there is a intellectual component of every church. There is a warm, comforting segment of every church, and that everybody. And I think one of the biggest problems in churches is that they don't treasure their differences. They don't treasure their variety. And I'm that way. I have a tendency to want to make people like me, and I preach that way. You got to be like me. You got to do things the way I do things. And yet other people they're just different. They have different desires. And even somebody like James Tour or something, he hasn't been led down the road I've been led down. And so if he doesn't, I don't know that he doesn't, but if he doesn't believe in the flood, he'll have to answer to God for that. I just have to tell him, okay, I disagree. You don't really believe the Bible. And I think he could come to that. He could come to realize, you're right. I haven't been believing it. If I were to be honest, and if we just don't say anything, then. But in my mind, no, the churches are not failing. The church, in fact, I find the churches that are not, they don't have the advantages that our churches have as far as understanding sound doctrine and stuff. Southern Baptist churches, and I don't believe they're failing. I find them amazing, except they're failing in the sense that they are handicapped by American privilege or whatever it is. But churches in China, I don't believe they're failing. I believe they are strongly intellectual, and I believe Christianity is worldwide, and that you can go into Argentina and you'll find them talking about the same things you and me are talking about right now, and they're up to date on these things, and they're using the same books. The people in Leon, you go there and they have these same kind of questions. I'll bet you if you had an audience of them down there, they'd be asking the same kind of questions you're asking or that I'm asking. I don't find them intellectually deficient. I do find that intellectual Christians give way too much credit to atheists or to atheistic thinking, and not near enough credit to simple Christians, farmer Christians, and vulcanizadores, and I'm sorry, that's Spanish. Tire changers and people who work at Sam's. You know, they've got their own mind, they got their own way of thinking, and they think scientifically too, just on different level. They're not into astrophysics.
Well, I hope you're right. I'm not sure you are. I hope you're right. It doesn't seem to me that that's the case, especially in the smaller churches, that space is allowed for anyone to think this, to think.
You're right. They would not be allowed to think that there was no flood. They would be pressured right out of the church.
Yeah.
Because we are zealous about.
Although I wouldn't characterize
it
it with that one, but yes, I understand your point, and yes. But no, I don't know that it's that way. They would, let me give you an example. In one of the churches I was involved in, I won't say which one, there was a brother there that was very much a young earth creationist, and I think you'd be right on board with him in all his interpretation, all the way he saw every portion dealing with creation and everything. He was not allowed to speak on those things in the church because it was too scientific, and that it was going to destroy people's faith by hearing it from any perspective other than coming from just reading a verse and saying that's what it is. So if you have any evidence, if you have any scientific evidence, if you have any naturalistic evidence, any that could not be said.
Well, I can't speak for that exact, but I know parallel situations like that, and the pastors were absolutely right to tell this fella, shut up, because, and I'm not talking about your fella, but other people that I've known that they just get on a tangent, and they are on that, and that's all they want to talk about. And we've had people in our church that way, and you have to tell them, no, we're not talking about that anymore. That's enough. And it's not because we're anti-scientific. It's because it's hogging the conversation, perhaps, or because it's way too dogmatic. Like you think you know something you really don't know, and people will disagree, and that's not what the church is about. The church is not necessarily, especially not the main meetings. I mean, I can see having a Sunday school class on it, but like in an open meeting, stand up and preach on creationism about young earth, whatever. No. And by the way, I'm not young earth. I believe that
You need to get that over in front of you. Pull it. You can just pull it straight out. There you go. It's because the voice only comes in right from the front.
This is the front over here?
Yeah, that's
not
the front.
This.
No.
Okay. Anyway, no, I'm not dogmatically young earth. I'm very open to it, and I really do see I think there's like 4 different theories, and I see all of them as viable according to the first chapter of Genesis, but they're not all viable scientifically. In other words, I don't think you can prove certain things scientifically. But I think that I think they have something to do with it. In other words, I think all of these have their place. For example, I'll just give you an idea. I believe there was a gap between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2, simply because I prefer that to the young earth explanations of light,
Being faster one way than the other.
Oh yeah, whatever, or being immediate in certain, in a vacuum, or I don't know, or God creating light in transit. None of those things satisfy me. But I grew up with the gap theory. I knew that light was that old.
But isn't that basically a accommodation to science?
Yes, but it fits the scripture. It's what the scriptures say.
But that's what everyone would. I say everyone. That's an overstatement. That's what many people would say that you're accusing of not believing the Bible would say, that they're accommodating their view, their interpretation to fit what appears to be solid science.
That's fine if it fits what the Bible says. It's not fine if it contradicts what the Bible says. Saying that all the high mountains were not covered with water contradicts what the Bible says. Saying that there was that the Genesis 1:1 is not part of day one does not contradict what it says.
Well, there's people that would strongly disagree with the second statement.
And
they would
like
say
I say, I'm flexible on that.
New Earthers would be aghast at the idea that
Young Earthers,
would be aghast at the idea that Genesis 1:1 and 1:2 are somehow divided by this huge gap to accommodate naturalistic science. I mean, they would just be.
Well, and it's possible. It's possible that they're right, that God created light and transit.
So then if they are right, does that mean you don't believe the Bible? See, that's my problem.
No, because what I'm talking about here is a strict following of the Bible, what it says. I am not interpreting allegorically anything in the Bible. I treat every single word as treasure from God. He tells me this is what happens, this is what I believe. But I don't find anything that would contradict the gap theory. Tell me something that contradicts the gap theory.
I'm not arguing for or against that. That's not my point. My point
The only thing I've heard is what the young Earth creationists say was that there was death, but that's the gap theory of the age before Adam, that there was an entire Earth there that God destroyed. I don't believe that. I'm not saying that. I just don't see why God could not. And also the idea of a day age type thing. The Bible says clearly that time is relative with God. A day is with the Lord is 1,000 years. 1,000 years is one day. And so, saying that God created it in a day when God's already told you that a day is not exactly the length of a day to me. I can do whatever I want in a day, and He can compress one day to be a 1 second, or He can compress 1,000,000 years to be 1 second. I don't know, but there is that option written down in the Bible. Now, if I say what the Bible says about the flood, and I'm making this point because it's the one I know, I know what the Bible says about the flood, and if I were to agree with non-flood geology, regular uniformitarian geology, most scientists would say it's just uniformitarian geology. Everything has to be explained by natural processes that are in effect today. Then I would say I don't believe the Bible. I do not believe the flood account in the Bible. It's a myth. It's a legend. But since I personally believe it, and I've also seen scientific evidence for it, I just have no objection to it. And anybody who denies it is not only denying what the Bible actually says, but they're denying science. They're denying the explanation of fossilization. Do you realize that naturalistic geologists have no explanation for fossils? There's no fossils being created anywhere right now, unless it's in some volcanic ash covering it up right now. That's the only places that they can find it. But normal sedimentary fossilization is not happening anywhere in the world. And yet what we see in the rocks it was an enormous thing. I mean, so much that we can't even count it. They have that Karoo Formation in South Africa that covers almost the size of Mexico, the country of Mexico, and it's 10,000 feet thick, and it's full of fossils. How did that happen? They're just ignoring scientific evidence because they can't believe it. And so they're bucking science and they're bucking the Bible. Now, and that's not at all what I'm doing when I say there could have been a gap between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2.
No, I understand what
which
you're
is the
saying.
way I was raised. That's what I was taught when I was a kid.
Right. So was I. I understand what you're saying. My difficulty with the position you're taking on this, and it's not on the flood, but it's on this point in general. I think that we start off with, let's say we start off, did Jesus raise from the dead? Was Jesus the Christ? And we say, yes, these are things that are elemental to belief. You have to believe these things. If you don't believe these things, you don't believe the Bible. And there's a point, I believe, that you get to where you can't make that claim anymore. Where you say, just because you don't believe this point doesn't mean you don't believe the Bible. And it's not because I'm trying to defend something I don't agree with. I think I probably am right along with you all the way to everything you said. I agree with you. I agree on the flood. I agree on everything you've said. So it's not personal. But I just don't, I have a very difficult time myself saying that line, what I would draw at Jesus being God, Jesus resurrecting from the dead, Jesus being the Messiah, runs all the way down to which point. And I find it too convenient that it ends at Genesis 1:2, and then like there, now there's flexibility. To me, that sounds awful convenient for such a hardline position.
Flexibility in what it says. In
I
other words,
understand.
you take what it says and allow it to say whatever it needs to say.
But you understand that I have talked to people on those who would say the same thing you're saying about the flood, they would say about the gap theory. And that it is completely unconscionable to read that into the Bible there. I don't know. It seems to me to be a little overstated, the way you're stating it, myself.
Now, in my mind, it's really just about semantics. If you're going to say you believe the Bible, then let's say you believe. Why are they so? Why do they demand that they also be considered real Bible believers, and yet they accommodate all of the scientific mumbo jumbo, and they don't want to lose face with their intellectual friends, and yet they're claiming to be Bible believers, and yet when it comes out, they're not believing what it actually says. And why then can't I say, well, that's not a Bible believer, just because,
Well, you can. I'm not sure that. One is I'm not sure that you've phrased it in a way that you probably would want to if you thought about it a little carefully, and that you're making aspirations as to what their intentions are, why they see it the way they see it, which I'm not sure you're aware you can be sure of. But the other thing is, you can say that they're not believing it, just like they can say they are. I'm not sure that it is profitable to make the distinctions on all the way down to that granularity, all the way down to that small. You basically are saying that no one believes the Bible unless they believe in the flood. But does that mean they don't believe Matthew? I don't understand what we're saying here.
Well, yeah, it'd be because
when you say it that
the greater
way,
context, yes.
When you say it that way, you're saying they're basically unbelievers. So then somebody, let's say that Hugh Ross, I don't know if he's a believer. I don't know him, so I can't say.
He's a believer.
Okay. So he's a believer, but he doesn't believe the Bible.
He doesn't believe the first 11 chapters.
Okay, but does he believe you see what I'm saying? There's a point where I say that a Pentecostal, I believe, completely misunderstands many portions of the Bible, and yet I would say they believe the Bible.
Sure. And I would say that Hugh Ross believes Genesis 12 on. I think he really does.
Would Hugh Ross say he believes Genesis 1 through 11?
He would
or
say
would he
does.
say he doesn't?
He would say he does. I think he ought to be honest and say, well, I don't believe that's real. I don't believe that really happened.
You mean honest with himself then? Because,
Yeah,
or do you
honest
think
with
he's being
everybody.
think he's lying? You think he knows in his mind that
Yes,
he doesn't
it's a
believe
lie.
it?
He
and
knows
he
he doesn't believe what it says, but he has these tools, and he's a good guy. I like the guy. And he makes good arguments against atheists and stuff. You know,
Right.
that's fine. And most of his debates are against young earthers. But and that's a pity for him. But in my mind, he's being dishonest. Anybody who claims to believe the first 11 chapters of Genesis but does not believe that the waters covered the high mountains, I'm sorry, they're being dishonest. It's just like the advertisers on television telling you what they say about their day, and they're not telling you the whole story.
Well, I think that's a little bit of a rough judgment on someone who is a believer, but whatever.
No, he's a believer up to that point. And there's a lot of this kind of unbelief, a tremendous amount of this kind of belief. And the truth is, fundamentalist Bible-believing Christianity has been fighting this tendency toward apostasy since the second apostasy started, probably back in the 1700s. And evolution is a huge part of it. This is a different philosophy that is fighting. It's just like in the New Testament where John the Apostle says, anybody who says that Jesus Christ has not come in the flesh is Antichrist. Well, now that's pretty strong words to say.
But you can't, I don't think it's fair to say that because you say that you're Antichrist, therefore it follows that if you say anything against any part of the Bible, that you're antichrist. Are you saying that follows?
But there
that?
is a judgment call on whether you got these people who claim to be Christians and they're teaching in Christian colleges and they do not believe the Bible. They really do not believe it. Bart Ehrman teaches in a Christian, he does not believe anything of the Bible.
He doesn't teach in a Christian college.
He teaches at Chapel Hill, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill,
He's in New Testament. Yeah, he's in the New Testament studies, and he doesn't pretend to be a believer. He says he doesn't believe the Bible.
Right, he says he doesn't believe the Bible.
No, he's right out. But Dan Wallace teaches in a Christian college. He teaches in the Dallas Theological Seminary.
I don't know him.
He's a Christian.
Well, we got to be able to make some kind of a judgment about whether somebody believes the Bible or not. And when somebody capitulates to a clear disbelief of what it says,
I don't know. I mean, I'm not. Obviously, we probably won't agree on this, and I'll let you, have the say on it. It's fine. My position is that I'm not willing to take that point beyond what I consider to be essentials of the faith. And so when John says that you have to believe that Christ has come in the flesh, okay, but that doesn't mean John says you have to believe the mountains were covered with water, or you're antichrist.
right?
And it just, I know you're not saying that, but the way you're phrasing it really pushes it to where it's like, if you don't accept
it's partisanship.
what I see.
It's like choose a side. Choose a side. It doesn't matter. I have to have a problem with someone who pretends to be defending the Bible against the scientific establishment and then doesn't believe what it actually says.
Well, see, like we talked a little bit about William Lane Craig. William Lane Craig holds certain views that I don't think are correct. I don't think William Lane Craig is doing any disservice to Christianity by his ministry. I support him. I just don't agree with him on everything. But I wouldn't say that he doesn't believe the Bible. Now, he may be wrong about it.
No, I would agree with that because there are a lot of beliefs that are based on the Bible under an interpretive framework. But when you take the interpretive framework of science, where you say I'm not going to endanger my position at my university by being a wild-eyed Bible believer, and so then you wind up denying what it actually says.
That's assuming that's why they're doing it, not that they're sincerely disagree.
Well, that's
with
true.
whatever. I mean, that's my
true.
point. I mean, it's not that I disagree with your position at all. I agree completely with what you have expressed as your position as to the flood and everything. I just can't see my way to making those claims on the way you were doing them. But.
Well, maybe the whole difference is that I'm much more willing to draw the line in the sand and say I'm not interested in appeasing people who don't believe the Bible. If you really don't believe the Bible, that's fine. You don't have to. I talk to people all the time. And they tell me, no, I don't believe it. And that's fine. I understand that. But if you're claiming to believe the Bible, then my goodness, let's draw a line. If you don't believe it, then just tell us you don't believe it. It's fine with me. And if somebody is genuinely looking at the scriptures and they read Genesis 6-9, and they say, I think what that's saying is that there was a local flood that was really exaggerated in their mind, and they're genuinely sincere about that, well, then maybe I've done them wrong. But the vast majority of these people, they have decided that could not have possibly happened. And so they're trying to explain it away, or they just ignore it completely.
Well,
in that mind, that's not the same thing.
Okay, that's fair. Here's an alternative reason why somebody, and this is I'm not of that mindset, so it's hard for me to imagine why someone would think what they think. But I can see an alternative where you would have someone who says, I look at the scientific evidence we have of the universe and the world, and it is much, much older than 10,000 years. Much older. That's what they're saying. And when I look at that and to say that there was one flood that accounts for all geological evidence that we have, that doesn't make sense to me. And so this could very well be a massive catastrophic flood for the entire human population without being a global flood, that it covered that place, that population. It didn't necessarily reach the Americas, let's say.
But they came to that conclusion by not believing what it says.
Well, maybe. But to me, there's
Well, it does
little
say,
difference.
It does say those. The words that we're talking about, it says those. There is no equivocation. We know what it says. And they have to fudge what it says. They got to say it doesn't really say that, or doesn't mean that, or they were speaking idiomatically.
Or they say there's other places where the Bible says things that on face value mean something that we don't accept that way anyway. And so it seems unfair. Like the whole earth came to be taxed. Is this what it says?
Yep.
So the Incas came to be taxed.
No, it doesn't say the whole. Okay, I get what you're
Yeah,
saying. I know what you're saying,
Again,
and yet I don't.
you understand?
I don't believe that fits.
This is a devil advocate. I'm not. I want people to understand. I'm not advocating for their position. I don't believe I actually believe the flood was global.
Understanding the Bible the way it was intended, what they wrote, what they wanted you to understand. I know what Genesis 6 through 9. I guess it was Noah that wrote it. I know what he wanted me to understand. He says it pretty clearly. Understanding Genesis 1, I'm not terribly sure what God, because I'm assuming Adam wrote it or God wrote it or something, or Moses wrote it by revelation. I don't know how that came to knowledge, but I don't know what he's trying to tell me when he says in the beginning, what is this beginning? What does this mean? Or when he says, I created light, but then later on he creates the greater light and the lesser light. All right, I'm confused. I'm already confused by reading it. So somebody has a flexible understanding of Genesis 1, I give them a lot of leeway, and I understand that. I do not criticize old earth people on that basis. And I don't criticize young earth people either, because they say, well, it says the day. I just assume it's the day. That's perfectly legitimate. But when you get to, Abraham, or you get to David, King David, and it says this happened, you don't have to believe it. But don't pretend you believe it if you don't believe it. And there's so many. Read the books. Just read the books, especially higher criticism from the late 19th century. And you see people who just don't believe the Bible. They do not believe it. And Bart Ehrman is honest. He's come straight out and says, no, I don't believe it. I used to, now I don't.
Mm-hmm. No, yeah.
Right. And that's beautiful. Honest. I love that. Just tell me just choose a side. That's fine. You don't have to believe the Bible.
Right. All right. Well, we'll leave it there. We're out of time. I think that was a very interesting conversation. We appreciate you coming in. I know it's a long drive for you guys, so I appreciate everyone who comes out and willing to talk to us.
30 minutes.
and like I said, you can find Bill's content, the videos that he's talking about. He does the unapologetics videos. I think they're very good. You can find those on his YouTube channel. If you search for unapologetics, you need to put some way. I was going to tell you that unapologetics pulls up a lot of channels, believe it or not.
Mine is like the third one.
Okay. Well, I always had a hard time finding it.
But just type in YouTube/unapologetics Bible.
Okay. We'll put that in the description so you can find it real easily. But if you want to look for it, it's YouTube/unapologetics Bible.
All one word. Yeah.
All one word. And that'll take you to there. He has a whole bunch of videos, short videos that are more gospel oriented. And you can go and watch those. You can also find his sermons on thegatheringsinjesusname.org, and as well as information about his church. And they also have a YouTube channel for Gatherings in Jesus' Name. And you can find his sermons both in video and audio on those formats. And so we thank you again for coming, and we'll talk to you next Saturday.